I have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful and strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the Xenomorph cardstock to my hit media tie-in.
Did I research the wrong thing? I feel like I researched the wrong thing. The Unplugged Professor is the person right before you, but I'm pretty sure I researched the wrong thing. I thought we were doing a Twin Peaks Logcast.
We are talking about the Twin Peaks collectible card art from 1991. And while doing my research, I was kind of perplexed. I was like, I don't think TV shows normally have card art. How weird is that? And when I was doing my research into the company, I didn't do a super deep dive, but it turns out that the Star Pix company, around the same time, also made Alien 3 collectible card art. So I don't know if they did anything other than Alien 3 in Twin Peaks. That's what my research turned up.
I mean, with the cursory, sort of search, there's also Star Pix when they handled things such as sports and...
Well, yeah.
Apparently, Playboy.
Well, yeah, though again, those are medias. Those aren't like shows or movies, though.
Yeah, it's all basically the same thing when it comes to cards. You know, baseball, Playboy, Twin Peaks, Alien 3, all associated with one another.
All equally involve balls. That's the tie-in.
That's how we're starting things, isn't it?
Speaking of balls.
Speaking of balls,
go
on.
No content warnings for this episode.
What does that do with balls?
I don't think we're talking about anything controversial in this episode.
Then why balls?
Speaking also of balls, there are going to be spoilers for all of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, the 90s Twin Peaks books, and although unlikely we're going to bring it up, any David Lynch film before Inland Empire is on the table. Possibility may or may not exist, like balls.
Are you okay after Dumbland?
I have 2 trivia sources.
I'll take that as a no.
Each one like a ball. There's 25 years later, and the Twin Peaks Wiki. I know what you may be wondering. How available are these balls? Well, turns out.
No, I did not think that phrase.
I'm sorry. I've been sick this week, and my brain is rotting from the inside out. And I'm not liable for anything I say during this podcast. I have rescinded all of my culpability.
You can't just do that. You can't just wave your hands in the air and say, not my fault.
Not my fault, then I attack. Anyway, so these cards are no longer in print. You can still find them oftentimes online for not super expensive. They're not too hard to find.
I was able to pick up my copy through eBay. Mm-hmm. And on it, it's printed, says limited edition. Now, mind you, it just says limited edition right above all of the overall names on one side of the card. That's the only thing that's really different from the regular edition and the limited edition from what I can tell, judging from the fact that we can view all these cards also on the special features, which does not feature the limited edition print above it. It's all in all caps, so it's nice. So it's affirming the great purchase I made.
So when you said they're on the special features, is that also on the Z to A collection?
Z to A collection special features is what I'm referencing because those are the only special features I'm aware of, but I am pretty sure that that's also adapted from other special features.
Yeah, they're
which you're
also on
mention.
the gold box edition.
Yes.
So since the gold box edition 2007, and then continuing into the Z to A collection, they've been available in a virtual space.
You'll be able to find these just on card form, but in slow, press the right button to change to the next card format in your special feature section.
I am very thankful that you were able to acquire a physical copy of them, because, sometimes items like this, I could see it being really rare. It seems like they must have made enough that there's still unopened packages relatively available. With that availability of the cards, there's a decent chance that listeners may not have seen these cards for themselves or have access to the DVD guide. We will do our best to explain some of the contents and ideas of the cards, even if you haven't checked them out physically. We'd recommend you check them out physically, but don't be worried that if this is not going to be possible to follow along with. We'll guide you through this.
There's 76 cards inside of this. So just again, imagine flipping through 76 of them, either in card form or in your special feature, slowly loading every single piece. But very notably, one of the things that was offered or understood, maybe that was also something that was an appeal of the limited edition set. I'm not sure because it's been a while since I purchased them, but I do recall the big advertisement on them was that there was a chance that one of these cards could be signed.
Yes.
If you will. So I'm imagining that it's like per character, if you will, that like say, for example, the person who played Norma, potentially hers could be signed.
Yeah.
David Lynch card could be signed. Fish, it could be signed by an
and
actual fish.
I was looking around, and there's still some speculation out there of whether or not all the signed copies have been found. There's that chance that there still could be signed copies unopened, because why wouldn't there be? So it does sound like there's still possibly some signed ones floating out there in the ether. Mm-hmm. The ether of the internet.
The ether
of cable.
Someone's unopened collectible, which I refuse to not open. This is all
open.
mine. I must touch all of them.
So, general thoughts on the collectible Twin Peaks card art. Go.
Overall, it's a nice bit of snippet of information and very much what I feel to be kind of a timepiece. Like, maybe there is something that's equivalent that's released nowadays, if you will. But as far as I'm concerned, like, multiple of these overall pieces are big quotes, if you will, that for the minds that can over-speculate like my own, it's good to have them on hand rather than referencing, say, for example, a VHS at the time or a DVD at a later time. You just have them on hand, if you will, for some relatively very important quotes and some other ones that are very choice quotes inside of this. There are multiple instances of finding out more about characters in a... Let's just say the format of this is a very interesting light that I can't help but enjoy the humor and dive deeper. It's a similar appeal to how Welcome to Twin Peaks was, but with an added layer of like, wait, what? Excuse me?
Referring to the access guide, correct?
Referring to the access guide, yes. There's more instances of that because these cards are existing in two realms, you see. One of them is that you are getting like eyes, ams, if you will, as if like the characters are like speaking forward to whoever, if you will, like reporting themselves. And then you have like their actors pegged into there, like Peggy Lipton as Norma Jennings, if you will. It's not from the same perspective. Not to mention, there's also points in which like there's characters that have that first person view, like Laura Palmer, famously dead through the series in first person view, taking on these interviews.
Yeah, between the access guide and this card art, obviously we're biased toward Twin Peaks merchandise and media because we like Twin Peaks and we're exploring it, but also just in general from a media collection standpoint, media preservation, Twin Peaks had a weird series of releases.
Yes.
This is definitely notable that most things don't have collectible card art and fictional guides to towns that don't exist with maps.
Now, like I said before, like most things do kind of parallel with the ideas of baseball Playboy.
Balls. So I personally don't consider these cards canon for my headcanon.
Fair one.
Like we've said time and time again, it goes beyond, death of the author. It's more the idea to me that if you want to believe in your heart that these things are canon, they're canon for you. If you want to watch Twin Peaks and consider Fire Walk With Me not canon, amen. Good luck for that. You can go ahead and do that. I'm not going to get too stuck up on it. For me, I don't personally consider the cards headcanon to me, whereas I do consider the diary canon. I would consider the Access Guide and the Dale Cooper My Life, My Tapes to be semi-canon in my head. This is the only one where I'm just like, nah, I really don't believe these cards mean anything.
Yeah.
I couldn't find a lot really indicating how involved Lynch and Frost or other writers really were in the production of these cards. There are elements of these cards that to me feel very half-baked, like kind of just random. You mentioned before the idea of dead characters in first person and just some weird elements of who's talking and who's not talking, how they're talking. They don't sound like themselves. One that I found was noted by a 25 Years Later article is that Jean Renault's education is just listed as Quebec Reform School, like very vaguely. It's just, there's some things in here that don't feel very thoroughly thought out, which is fine if they're just a little collectible. Like, if you take them as just a merchandising thing, that's cool. I like that a lot. If you take it as being, like, another piece of the canon, that's where it starts to get to be like, okay, no, I don't think Jean Renault just went to a place, called Quebec Reform School. I think they put that in there because they didn't have a name on the top of their head.
But at the same time, I would also argue that very similar to the Twin Peaks Access Guide, there's sometimes cheeky tones that come through.
Right.
Throughout this, there's points in, like, say, for example, they're referencing a specific time and place or certain likes that overall is just a little bit humorous. Like, okay, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
It's like, I think
just when information contradicts or these cards say something that the rest of the media doesn't, I take it with a boulder of salt.
I would say that as far as like any sort of contradictions that do go through, like there likely will be some contradictions that come up. You have informed me of one contradiction that does come up that is separate from, say, for example, these cards as far as information goes. We'll likely go over that later. As far as what I'm like concerned about is that it seems that a lot of it is like compiled information from like different sources, like the books that we've already read, like the Secret Pirate Diary of Lauren Palmer, My Life, My Tapes, the Twin Peaks Access Guide, as well as even the Twin Peaks Gazette. There are references across all the material and compiling them.
These cards came out before My Life, My Tapes and the Access Guide.
But still, regardless,
they referenced the thing that hadn't come out yet.
Exactly. So there's a very much still a large like circulatory sort of like desire to try to collect all these pieces for their time. Not to mention, a lot of the information is not only just repeat, but is mostly harmless, I find, for the most part, with the exception of the one detail you mentioned before, which we'll get into later, just because like it's a fun sort of like look into some of the characters' minds, if you will, and perspectives. Like one of my favorite cards that we'll likely get into later will be Leo Johnson.
Right.
Just because looking into that sort of scale and like looking through Leo in that sort of lens, I can see it, and it's something that's appealing enough to me, but nothing to the point in which I would say that you would be hurt by considering these cards canon.
No, I don't think you'd be hurt. It's not going to damage you. I think sometimes people take canon way too seriously. Yeah. It's media. It's fun. It's something light. I just don't put a lot of stock in the card stock.
Got it. Which, by the way, speaking of the card stock, it's a nice thickness to it overall, which I thoroughly enjoy. Each of the cards have like a little oak or like wooden style outer frame, like border with the overall character's face, but or just like the place's face, the location's face.
Yep.
But for those sort of cards in which like you have locations or you have that, on the other end, you have a photo negative of that like card as like something aesthetic. They didn't have to put that there.
The duality of man.
Like, there's multiple cards, like, say, for example, for famous dialogue and so on, that's not apparent for. But for some reason, it was just an active choice to put photonegative faces everywhere on it, which is very eerie looking at even, like, Julie Cruz or Bob. Bob is a card. There's a spoiler for you. Photonegative Whitetail Falls. It's something in which I can see, say, for example, a Twin Peaks fan
mirroring
enjoying.
And inversing within the scope of Twin Peaks. It's par for the course.
It's par for the course. Still was an active, very creative, and interesting choice.
These cards were never necessary. Nothing with these cards was necessary. This is all extra.
Yes.
This is all, like, chosen to have happened. And again, it's in a case like the Access Guide of, you know, the creators of Twin Peaks and probably, like, CBS as well, making some strange business deals and associations with companies that otherwise don't seem to dabble in this very much.
Now, I know that we do not have our hands on, like, the Twin Peaks Gazette and so on.
But unfortunately.
But on the other piece of material, all the extra material that we have been able to explore together and so on, I would say that, considering it, this is what I would quantify as the least necessary material to own. Like, for the other ones, like, I think we could make larger arguments. For this one, it's fun. It's nice. If you're a fan of Twin Peaks, you'll probably have a good time reading through it just as we have. But it's not something in which I will say is definitive.
As far as the timeline, they were released in the April month of 1991. I don't know why I said the April month, but that's what I said.
Yeah, in the overall timeline, in which
April is a very important month in Twin Peaks. It's when they have the Miss Twin Peaks. It's when they have the stuff going on with the moons and the Saturns.
Or so they say. Or perhaps it's late March.
Ooh,
dun, dun,
timelines. Bookhouse boys know all. And it was released just before the end of the second season, so there are no elements from late second season in here. Unfortunately, there's no Wyndham Earl card. There's no Wyndham Earl card, even though they mention Wyndham Earl.
They do mention Wyndham Earl. They mention all sorts of characters along the way that would
There's no doorknob for Josie.
There's no doorknob for Josie, and again, Laura Palmer's alive. So
yes, just like she was mid-season 2. Curious. There's not a lot of information that I could glean about these cards. There was a rather insightful article on 25 Years Later by Brian Allen. And he had a few observations that I wanted to share with you.
Okay.
One of them, kind of just jumping ahead with the character, is that Hawk's card has a sort of weird continuity to it. This might be the thing you were referencing earlier. I'm not sure. Okay, cool. We had talked a little bit about this before the pod then, that Hawk is being portrayed on the card as from the Zuni tribe and Zuni Reservation, which is located in New Mexico. Now, there's no reason why he can't have family in New Mexico, but this does contradict what he says about like having heritage in the area, as well as other Twin Peaks material will contradict this. That it seems like the card is the outlier saying he's from the Zuni tribe. It doesn't fit anything else, and it feels like that was just not correct.
Okay.
I don't know where they got the information when they put that in there for Hawk.
Now, I will put forward that the likely choice of using Zuni, if you will, is because Michael Horse is like Zuni is inside of his descendants, if you will. So using the actor's descendants in this overall respects, it's understandable where that can overall come from. The character himself, then, is like being born inside of that. That's where the differences comes through. So it doesn't seem like it was trying to be like overtly like negligent.
No, I don't think it was done in any sort of bad intention. I just think that it wasn't very consistently researched with the rest of the Twin Peaks material.
And with that in mind, I just want to like posit the question: what is more apt, if you will, to go for the overall lineage and overall identification of the actor, or better for the overall character, depending on that character being from that location? Like, which do you think is the better option here?
I mean, in universe, I would say it should be where the character is from.
Okay.
You could argue that maybe in crafting the character and casting the character, authenticity is oftentimes a goal that should be prioritized.
Okay.
Like, you shouldn't cast Scarlett Johansson to be an Asian character. That kind of, it's kind of a meme at this point if you're aware of that Ghost in the Shell fiasco from a few years ago. But yeah, you want to cast someone who fits the role. But from my understanding, I don't think Michael Horse ever objected to Hawk's heritage being slightly different from his own in the show's narrative. So if the Twin Peaks card art is oftentimes in first person, oftentimes treated as though it is real, the same way the access guide is, then it should probably follow the same canon as the other Twin Peaks material.
Okay.
Would be my general answer. Another character that had a bit of a contradiction is James. This one I don't think is as easy to wave away. I think it's just kind of an oversight. James is listed here as one of his major accomplishments on the card is graduating. But in the show, I don't think he ever graduated. And this is what Brian Allen was pointing out, is that he left the show and drove on his motorcycle out of town and never really came back. And that was when we still saw Donna and Audrey going to school. So it's unlikely James ever graduated Twin Peaks, especially by the time these cards would have been released.
It's the funny question of overall timeline. Like, say, for example, graduating high school, maybe that was just the active goal, of which he's saying to himself that
you can't call that an accomplishment if it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, it's an accomplishment of making it so far.
My favorite accomplishment is winning $1 million. When that happens, it'll be my best thing. Not to say that that's equivalent to odds. James could graduate. I just don't think he did.
Yeah, James could graduate. Maybe were they inside their senior year, like when they were going through? So maybe there was the expectation of I'm going to be graduating.
You can't say that's your accomplishment.
Before he turned that around.
You can't say that's your accomplishment. You can't be halfway through your senior year and say, "Oh man, I was happy when I graduated."
There's a lot of things that we can tell James that you can't just do that, but James does it. So
okay.
But I can see where this discrepancy can happen.
And then the third observation of a potential issue was with card number 67. And there's this quote card, I believe it is, where it's "Don't let him rattle you." And on the back of the card, it states that Cooper's former partner, Wyndham Earle, again, who sadly does not have his own card in this set, is being sent to Twin Peaks to conduct an FBI internal affairs investigation on Cooper. Well, that obviously didn't happen. So this is less of a former media or side media problem. It's more that this card was being made around the time season 2 was still in development, and things changed before we actually got the final version.
Yeah.
So this is, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually kind of interesting, is that at one point, Wyndham Earle's reason to be in Twin Peaks was to conduct an FBI internal affairs investigation on Cooper. Probably around the time that Cooper's being invested by the DEA about those potential drug allegations.
Yeah.
So Wyndham Earle would have somehow been involved in investigating Cooper. Instead, he appears as some random wild man in the woods, to go and teach Leo some lessons about being a proper lion.
Which, by the way, it also, references inside of the cards itself on things such as My Life, My Tapes. And I know that just relatively, these were coming out at different times, but it's just, an interesting sort of, proto-communication that I'm very curious on, how much was developed around, these cards and each other, and how much were they flirting with each other, and how much were they able to communicate with each other. It must have been such a wild time to just try to make a bunch of media all at once.
Wild at heart.
Drastically different.
Drastically.
So
most of the cards in this set are broken down into, there's the characters, including some real life people. There's places. But there's also a few miscellaneous things that I want to start out with the miscellaneous first. If that's cool with you?
Oh, by all means. What do you mean by miscellaneous, though?
So, first off is the title card. It says Welcome to Twin Peaks on it. I believe it's card number 1, I want to say. Or card number 0 if there's a 0 card.
There's card number 1, and that is that, because card number 2 is the table of contents, which is such a weird thing, just being
have a card table of contents.
Card table of contents, and that's card number 2. It's called a checklist.
Huh. I guess to make sure you're not missing any. Even though they are numbered.
Well, that's because of the framework brought up onto the first card. The first card itself, it starts off with this larger quote from Harry Truman, if you will, talking about how he's been a sheriff for about 6 years. Hard to believe that everything's happened in Twin Peaks. That apparently, there's some, nasty stuff going on, but hey, the FBI's here to help us out. Really weird if, Terry Truman is speaking to...
Terry Truman?
Harry Truman. If he's speaking to you,
well, yeah, it's to
holder.
a you, because it does imply that this is a self-guided tour.
As you embark, now mind you, it might be you, the person who is actively holding these cards, as if you're supposed to put your head in the space of someone wandering around Twin Peaks, or if it's going to be a unnamed you person, like someone who wrote the All Access guide.
Secret. Who's the you? The ultimate Twin Peaks mystery revealed. It is strange, because at least with the Access guide, it's believable that there could be a town guidebook. This is weird, because it's people talking about their personal lives on cards, and it's being framed as a self-guided tour. So I think the idea is you are talking to these people. But then, how do you run into a quote?
How do you run into a quote?
How are you running into Corpse of Laura Palmer, which is a card? How are you talking to Laura Palmer in first person? I don't understand.
And who are you in which, you are focused on making sure you know their birth date, their signs, their likes, and their education?
Well, we do actually have information on the signs.
We do have some we do have some information on signs. I'm just imagining, the perspective of whoever the you is gaining this information. But we do have a reason why there are these signs.
So, yeah, simultaneously, the cards are happening. The cards are a real object, and also at the same time the cards are a metaphor for a self-guided tour. But as far as those signs go, we find out in one of the production notes that a practicing astrologer for 20 years, Bill Herbst,
and big fan of Twin Peaks.
And
big fan of Twin Peaks.
Big fan of Twin Peaks. After careful analysis of the character profiles, Herbst determined each character's birth date and zodiac sign. So it's not the person telling you their zodiac sign, it's the semi-canon, semi-not canon, is he in Twin Peaks, is he in the real world, Bill Herbst, who is going to interpret he's the Virgil to your Dante. But it's for cards. It's so confusing. The other thing on that first card, though, that title card, after Harry Truman gives his little blurb, there's a note at the bottom. And it says, to truly experience the intrigue surrounding Twin Peaks, you should first refer to card number 2 and then organize your cards numerically. So it guides you.
Kalil, you should organize your cards numerically. Isn't that a wonder?
I did not do this. I looked at the cards. I separated the cards. I separated the cards in categories, and I looped them that way. I did not care about the number at all.
Numbers.
Did you look at them in order?
Yes, I did.
Did that enhance your experience?
It's most certainly had some interesting sort of pacing items. Say, for example, Whitetail Falls is led with the owls that are not what they seem, followed by Jean Renault, followed by the Giant Bob. Mm-hmm. So there's Jean Renault, who would fit very well back here in the Roadhouse and One-Eyed Jacks and Benjamin
but
Horn
put
and
in
so
a
on,
different spot.
but put in a very strange yet specific spot.
And
For
you
the
think
most part,
you think it's on purpose?
it looks like it potentially, like what I have a mild like idea on is like a lot of this seems to be very much order of importance and introduction, like say for example in like a pace of the overall series, not necessarily when they first appear on the screen, but for the most when they're most notable on the screen.
Okay.
That's where I'm leading on, but at the same time, some of the inconsistencies there are the Giant Bob, One-Armed Man, and Killer Bob. So those are like all lumped together in an interesting spot. And yes, we do interview Bob and the Giant.
I did not follow the number order that it thought was so important, and I did not think I
it's
got hurt
something
from it.
It's the same sort of like situation where I've mentioned before, where it scratches at my brain, but not in a bad way.
To me, it feels arbitrary. It doesn't feel like it's part of the master scope of the plan.
Maybe
it just feels kind of random.
Maybe Jean Renault is an owl that is not what he seems and is hanging out with the Giants. Like Jean Renault, the Giant, Bob, One-Armed Man, basically all the same person.
Jean Renault, more like Giant Renault.
There's also, like, shortly after that, one card that we're probably not going to cover all too much is, like, Bird. Yes. It's the Bewick's Wren. It is the opening shot of Twin Peaks. It's the bird, if you will, showed off for nature. But just to let you all know is that the cards can have, like, two different, like, titles, if you will. On one front card, it's just Bird. But then the other side, Bewick Wren, a very specific bird, if you will. There's, again, another layer of entertainment that I get from this.
Yeah. We're also easily entertained by Twin Peaks media. I feel like most people are not fans of Twin Peaks, but like, okay, it's a bird. Great. Love it.
But it is a bird on both sides.
It's a bird on both sides. Isn't that amazing? There's also a few trivia cards on here that give some information. I thought was really interesting. What?
Oh, no, one of the trivia cards is one... I know you have an interesting one, but my more clearly better interesting one.
Yeah, say your better one, Professor.
Is the fact that there's like a wording for one of the cards in which is like, how much of the town does Benjamin Horn own?
Oh, yeah.
1/2. Yes. In which it's just referencing a line said in which Ben Horn owns half the town.
Yes.
But it's presented in a very informal way. That makes me wonder if this potential person taking the self-guided tour is a robot. Ah, yes. Benjamin Horn, he has acquired 0.5 of the town, put into a decimal point, if you will. It just feels so weird, fun, and robotic.
Wow, Professor. My one that I was going to say that obviously isn't as cool as yours is involving the timeline. We get on the trivia that there are 15 days have passed between Laura's body being discovered and the killer being arrested. We have talked a lot about time and Twin Peaks being very strange.
Yep. I'm
currently going through the work right now of re-listening to our old podcasts, and I'm at our season 1 look back.
Yeah.
And I remember on that pod talking about how season 1 takes place over the course of 1 week. That means that if we're following along with the math here, and if things are consistent in these cards that to be believed, it's 1 week from Cooper's arrival to Cooper getting shot, and then it's about another week from Cooper getting shot to Maddie's death. That is the timeline of Twin Peaks. Now, after that is a Wild West. I do not know, after the killer's revealed, how far between then and how's Annie? I don't know. That's the timeline. I'm not so
trivia
sure.
Cards. I need to figure out the timeline.
We got to get more cards.
There's someone who can figure out the birthdays of everyone in Twin Peaks, but...
Here's the thing. I don't consider the cards authoritative, so, like, I'm going to go with that number for right now because I straight up do not know how time works in Twin Peaks. But outside of, like, crunching the numbers and really finding a more authoritative source, all I can really do is give a dubious maybe to that 2-week time frame. Because it certainly feels like more than 15 days in like, plot and narrative time.
Yeah.
Between the first episode and the killer being revealed, being only 15 days, only half a month, is so wild and wild at heart. And I'm not sure I fully buy that in my soul. But time is weird in Twin Peaks. I also put down the note about Ben Horn owning half the town. Do you take that to be, like, true?
No.
So, like, how much of the town do you think Ben Horn does own?
I think that for the most part, it probably is something that's oddly specific. The big part about it is that we're thinking about a 5,000 people populace. We're thinking about one of the biggest points of industry being the hotel nearby. The fact that overall owns a department store that it seems
Right.
that people do rely off of, and has all sorts of shit-saying dealings. If anything, I think he owns over half the town.
Okay.
If I had to be
That's a
completely
bit
honest.
of a low number, you're thinking.
It's
Well,
a low
after
number,
the-
but at the same time, I think it's just a quirky way of saying, like, Ben Horn owns half the town.
And it is also a side that if he, Project Ghostwood gets what he wants out of things, it's going to increase dramatically.
Yeah.
How much he owns of the town. Because the lumber industry, it's the major workforce element of the town.
At this point, like, the biggest contenders, if you will, the Martell family or the Packard family, those individuals who are a big part of the industry inside of Twin Peaks, like post Sawmill and so on, yeah, kind of like Ben kind of has a fair portion of the town available to himself.
Yep. We also get an informational section on the original Bookhouse Boys, who are, most of these are pretty understandable. Sheriff Truman, Hank Jennings, Ed Hurley, the Hawk, which Tommy the Hawk Hill full name, and Cappy.
Yes, Cappy. Well-known Twin Peaks character, Cappy.
Two things I found weird. One is Cappy being an original, I think is curious. Like, most of the original people are the same people who played football that one year in Twin Peaks, right, when they won that game.
Are you
Won
trying?
that tournament, I should say. Cappy, however, I don't believe was in that list. And he's in the show. He has like 2 moments where he's referred to by name, basically.
Yeah.
Where it's like, Cappy, go run these files. And then Cappy will do that without saying a single line of dialogue.
Yeah, it's Cappy. Everyone loves Cappy.
Everyone loves Cappy. The other thing that seems weird about this is that, correct me if I'm wrong on my remembering of these lines, wasn't the implication that these Bookhouse Boys are not the first generation, that this has gone back and back, like their parents' generation also
The question
did this?
is whether or not, say, for example, because the Bookhouse Boys, it seems like, judging from the access guide, there is a lineage, there is a history, unless just specifically these people are the type of people to go out inside of robes in the middle of...
I don't believe that they're the original Bookhouse Boys, but that's how the card words it. And
It does
kinda
word it
strange
that
to
way,
me.
so it's either A, something similar to the card from beforehand, in which it's just trying to say, like, this was a proto idea.
Yeah.
Or B is a situation where they are the Bookhouse Boys, but more so inspired by Bookhouse Boys, if you will.
I think you could also take it less literally and say...
They are the reboot.
You could also say less lore-wise, they're more just originally the Bookhouse Boys in terms of the show, in that James and Joey Paulson are Bookhouse Boys of kind of the next generation, and originally before them came their parents' generation, and maybe that's what they mean by original, is just that in terms of the show's scope, because the show does not go 100 years in the past.
It does not.
So maybe it's just saying, originally Ben owned this hotel, ignoring the fact that he had ancestors before and all that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
maybe there's something there. I don't know. Even when I say that, though, I feel like that's actually a more accurate statement than the Bookhouse Boy one, because Ben was the groundbreaker on a lot of that stuff. But anyway, beside the point, also that the Bookhouse Boys membership is based on friendship and trust. There's no criteria. There's no test. There's no way of finding out if they're a good member. Nope, Hank Jennings, you're our friend. You can join.
Well, yeah, in a way, but then Hank Jennings is no longer friends, so that is a way that one can get kicked out. My question is that...
It's a boys'
is it
club.
dependent on, like, friendship with everyone in the group? Do I have to be intimate with Cappy in order to, like, get in? Or is there a point in which, like, I can just be, like, intimate with, like 80% at the very least?
I on one hand, I understand and agree that, like, okay, it makes sense. They're not as rule-bound. They're not as, like, by the book. Bookhouse, not by the book. It's more the idea that, if we trust you, you have to earn our trust to be a member. On one hand, that sounds like a good criteria, because if you can't trust them, how could you possibly rely on them as a team member? It's not a business. This is important. We're doing good work here for the community. On the other hand, the lack of credentials, the lack of criteria, it just sounds like kind of cronyism. Like, if we're your friend, you can join. If you're not our friend, sorry, you can't join. It's like a little secret club.
It's a little secret club. They hang out in their treehouse. It just so happens that the treehouse is just amongst the trees.
I don't know. It's hard to know how seriously to take with the Bookhouse Boys, because they seem to do almost nothing. Like, they talk big talk. They seem to, say that they're keeping the dark forces out of the town. But I'm also just like, no, you're not. We talked before how they did not help Laura Palmer very much at all. They didn't seem to even recognize that. But who else have they helped? Like, think of all the people in Twin Peaks whose lives have been hurt, either by spiritual or real-world dark forces. Yes, the law enforcement help, But, like, how much have the Bookhouse Boys really done? And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's because they're so secret. We don't know the hidden ways in which they've done so much good. But aside from, like, a couple times where, like, the Bookhouse Boys go on a mission undercover at, like, the casino or something, or One-Eye Jacks, what are they doing? I mean, Big Ed gets to wear funny mustaches, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm too critical on the Bookhouse Boys, but the fact that they have no criteria other than just being our friend just makes it seem like, hey, are you one of the boys or are you not one of the boys?
It's where you'll have to decide on whether or not this is something that is a society or not. If the Bookhouse Boys is just a group of individuals that have come together, it's more so of like a moral pact, if you will.
Yeah.
It is something in which like people are coming together that despite any rules or laws that come together, at the end of the day, the ends justify the means. They've got to make sure that they do what they got to do. And one of the points that they operate in that is during that One-Eye Jacks point. If it is a secret organization which people sort of like get together and say that they're going to be taking away these evils of the world, then it gets a little bit more dicey. Then it's getting a little bit more like, okay, what does this ritual do in which we're all getting cloaked up, grabbing our swords, and like we're traveling out into the middle of the woods?
Is it a weird, like, frat boy fraternity sort of hazing, or is it actually a meaningful thing?
Is it something in which like there's a history behind it, and if there's no history, then okay, what is this more so a group that are taking a credo similar to, like, say for example, like one parallel that's made in the past, Knights of the Round Table, if you will, by a personal oath, if you will.
But it's if the Knights of the Round Table were the local football team.
Yeah.
That's what this is. And you're not even a knight, you're just friends with each other, so that's your criteria. At least knights have to undergo, like, challenges and obstacles, and there's a test of their... Yep, that was the football. Also, this reminds me, and this is not probably an influence at all, I think it's just tangential, but it reminds me also of the Dead Poets Society. Have you seen the Dead Poets Society?
I have.
But just that collection of people in the night dressed up in their little cloaks going into a cave, conducting spontaneous rituals, and like it's good for their personal development, it's a good time, but I wouldn't trust those people with saving the town. Like that's not what that really is, but that's kind of what it reminds me of, just the idea of Hank Jennings, Cappy, and Big Ed just kind of gathering around wearing robes. I don't think of the Knights of the Round Table. I think of a bunch of teenagers who are probably like drinking, like I'm, and just carousing around.
Which is a thing that happens in the history of Twin Peaks and so on.
Yeah.
If we do think ancient society, okay, who knows? Maybe Cappy, that's just his latest iteration. He's like a Merlin sort of like teaching figure in which he's like not revealing all the secrets, but passively teaching people through the eons. But he truly is a person born of millennia. Cappy has been as old as Bob himself. And it's actually the combination of like Cappy trying to face Bob throughout these generations. Like, I know this is going to be a reveal for the return.
I don't want to spoil, obviously.
I can see it in your eyes.
I cannot talk about Copernicus. I'm sorry, I mean Cappy.
No!
I mean Cappy.
I knew it!
Ah!
That's been so well.
Copernicus. Anyway, there's also quote cards. There's a bunch where they just have a quote on them, and they say where in the show the quote happened. I have very little to say about this particular aspect of the cards. It's cool that it's there. A lot of the quotes are the ones you would expect to be there, and they're good.
Yeah.
Happy for them. I do want to note, however, that Gordon Cole's quote, when they quote him, his text is in all caps.
It's good.
And I'm glad that meant yelling in 1991 as well.
Like, there's points of, like, typeface that seem to, like, very rarely come up, if you will. Capitalization from Gordon Cole is one. There's one point in which, like, someone took the font and then put it up to, like, 50 as compared to 15. And, no, again, like, points of fun are found in these cards.
I honestly didn't know prior to this that capitalizing all the letters meant yelling in 1991 the same way it does now. Because the stereotype when I was growing up, because I was in that generation along with you where it's like the early days of very prominent internet. We were still on dial-up as kids, but internet was becoming more of a thing. Yeah. And the stereotype was that you'd have people typing in all caps who were like of an older generation who didn't really understand that caps lock was a thing and what was happening. So you'd see like people talking and like all typing in all caps, and I always, kids always interpret that as like yelling. I always thought that was like a modern internet phenomenon, but no, Gordon Cole types in all caps, or he's being represented by all caps.
Yeah.
So there's that idea of shouting is all caps. Even back then, I think that's kind of cool.
I'm pretty sure there were books that also featured things such
I'm sure there were, I just haven't seen them. So this is my first exposure to that. Learn that there's nothing new under the sun. That since the beginning of time, even old Copernicus could probably tell us about times growing up where that was the case. We also have Mark Frost being quoted from New York Magazine. in 1990. This is from the production notes. And he says, I would sit at the keyboard, referring to like how they would make the Twin Peaks scripts. I would sit at the keyboard and David would sit in a comfy chair. We would go back and forth. You throw your minds up toward the ceiling and they meet somewhere near the light fixtures. The script becomes written by a third party. The author is someone called Lynch Frost. Lynch-Frost.
Which has a beautiful sentiment, honestly. And I think that it says a lot when it comes to like making a creative process and like even beginning to disassociate the singular self into something that just becomes like this overall larger whole, especially like the way that they're over interpreting it, especially with David Lynch following up that quote is, "The thing is about secrets."
Yes. but it is true though, if you ever work like with other people on a writing project or a creative project, at a certain point it's not, two individual people, it becomes almost a third entity.
Yeah.
So there's some truth in that. And this also goes to further promote the idea that when people talk about Twin Peaks as being just David Lynch's baby, they're forgetting about the other person that carried that baby to term.
Lynch Frost.
Lynch Frost. That is the one who has been with baby. So David Lynch and Mark Frost also have cards in the set that is about them, that are their people, like as though they're characters in Twin Peaks.
Like there's actually like a whole bunch of individuals, like post-production notes, if you will. So these cards are completely separate.
Yes.
That come out as like Mark Frost, David Lynch, Angelo Badalamenti, Jennifer Lynch, and Julie Cruz.
Yes.
For the artists, for the music, for the most part, it shows off their accolades and so on. So it's just a nice little thing to show off them, if you will. Still get that nice photo negative treatment. I at first was thinking to myself, like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So this is like break the fourth wall and be like, yeah, this is what the characters do. And then it goes into like Mark Frost, if you will, going through like the beautiful, like, he's a playwright, actor, director, screenwriter, and producer, and just going into his accolades. And shortly after, in his strengths, he bats right, throws right, coached the Twin Peaks softball team to a near-perfect 24-14 record in 1989 and 1990 season. This is the only card amongst these other individuals that features the Twin Peaks softball team, showing that Mark Frost is physically available in Twin Peaks, and ergo potentially all the other characters. Julie Cruz, we already had like their.
It
like
opens the door in a Pandora's box kind of way to weird possibilities, because we know that in universe, Mark Frost plays a very minor character of a newscaster in Twin Peaks, like in a couple episodes.
Yes.
We see him on TV, Mark Frost. In the access guide, there's this photo that has David Lynch and Mark Frost as themselves in the access guide. Gordon Cole's not there. That's David Lynch. You can tell by how he's dressed. So, but that just was a photo. Now we got another missing link here. Now we have, if you believe these cards are canonical, you have proof then that a person named Mark Frost grew up in Twin Peaks, or at least coached in Twin Peaks during the 1989 to 1990 season. Again, during the time frame of the show, there was someone living in Twin Peaks named Mark Frost
that was also
who coached
all
the
these
softball
things.
team.
Like playwright, actor, director, screenwriter, and producer, living in Twin Peaks, coaching softball.
So we're assuming the real Mark Frost is canon in Twin Peaks, but did not write Twin Peaks. Because Twin Peaks doesn't exist in Twin Peaks, does it?
Twin Peaks.
Can they turn on the TV and, well, is that just Invitation to Love? Is he writing Invitation to Love? I'm so lost.
It's brilliant. But what I also do, it's brilliant. But what I also do adore is that inside the pictures, like we have like David Lynch having like a nice little like production photo of him just like standing out inside of the overall woods. The others are just like nice little profile pictures. Like Julie Cruz is a little bit stylized with plastic. But the most notable one I would say is Mark Frost. How would you describe this card with Mark Frost, Kalil?
I would describe it as world domination.
It looks like he's trying to take over the world in the next Spy Kids movie.
Like a James Bond Spy Kids kind of like effect going on in the background with like, I don't know, spiraling kind of happening.
It's like the lens of like a photo, if you will, but it kind of like continues to spiral out as if like there's still layers upon layers. And right next to him is the world.
The Earth.
The Earth.
First Twin Peaks, next the world.
He's just kind of like chilling there, just being like, hey.
I'm sure all it was that Mark Frost, recognized they're getting a company that normally does sports cards, like baseball cards, to do this promotion. So I'm assuming, when they were interviewing him, he wanted to bring up the fact that, I love softball, I love baseball. I actually really, I have good batting arm. Maybe he just was bringing up in the interview these things because, he's talking to people who make cards for baseball players.
Yeah.
And then it kind of morphed into this weird thing where he coached a Twin Peaks softball team. I don't know. That's very strange.
Do you think that David Lynch had anything to do with his card, with all the information
all
on
the
his
information.
card? Like, do you think that David Lynch had like influence and say on like, hey, this is how my card should go?
So, listener, if you don't have access to the cards, David Lynch's card is the most blank character card in the entire set, which is fitting. All that's there is accomplishments, Eagle Scout, born Missoula, Montana.
And everything else is like open residence. It's not like bigger font or anything
Nope,
like that.
just
Just
empty.
imagine like, here's the thing: is like about 10% of the card is filled out with media. The rest of it is the background.
And I think that's funny. I think that David Lynch has a sense of humor with that, because they definitely would have wanted. I can imagine people who are interviewing him who are like asking him other questions and wanted more information, and David's just sitting there smiling and like, that's it.
That's it.
That's all I want on the card.
That's all I want.
Which is
I'm
very
an Eagle
funny.
Scout, and I'm from Missoula, Montana.
Which, again, Eagle Scout, you connect to Dale Cooper. Missoula, Montana, you can connect to Maddie and other elements of the Twin Peaks canon. So there's potential overlap there and that are interesting to consider.
I also have to kind of question whether or not, say, for example, influence from David Lynch also went into Jennifer Lynch's card, because it's the only card to feature underlines.
Yeah.
It's like the only one out of 76 to feature underlines. And
one of them I
specifically
get.
for David Lynch.
One of them I get, 'cause-
David Lynch's daughter,
Yeah.
Jennifer Lynch.
Under strengths, Jennifer Lynch underlined it says damn good at keeping secrets. It's good because she was one of the 3 living souls who knew the killer before the killer was revealed.
Yes.
That makes sense why that's underlined.
And
the other underlined one is that rarely loses at Monopoly.
I mean, there's another one.
Oh, there's
which
a third
is,
one?
Yeah,
Oh, I
there's
just wrote down 2.
a good idea and a whole day to think about it. Which
but-
is referring to like a good story and a good dinner over good coffee.
I want to just focus on the rarely loses at Monopoly. Do you think there's any... I'm inclined to say no, by the way. I'm just asking. Do you think there's any big, important reason that mentioning her rarely losing a Monopoly is underlined?
She's secretly a rival to Benjamin Horn.
I mean, that's what I mean. Is there any reason why that would matter to underline it beyond just her emphasizing it?
No, for the most part, like, again, like, the inside the nickname section, it's Tree Frog, administered by David Lynch. It says, like,
Yeah.
not even, like, said by or, like, saved by. It's administered by David Lynch. You have
Yeah.
been provided this. A lot of it feels like something that either, like, herself, David Lynch, or both of them
Yeah.
may have come to a consensus on. This would look great. This looks nice.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
There's a sense of humor about this.
There's a sense of humor, and there's a nice personal touch on specifically Jennifer Lynch's that I especially like. Especially since, like, hers kind of goes more in detail of her overall likes. For
Yep.
example, coffee, she likes it hot, heavy cream, heavy sugar, and artichokes. Butter, melted is a must. Like,
Artichokes
it's
are
very,
great.
it's very personal for this card.
She
and I
refers
kind
to
of
herself
adore it.
also as the spokesperson for Laura Palmer, which is a good way to put it with her book.
Very fitting.
Yeah, rarely loses a Monopoly. I feel like Monopoly is such a game of luck. You know, I don't know, like how do you? I'm sure you can get good at Monopoly, but I'm just wondering, like, what do you think makes her a great? What separates a great Monopoly player from an average Monopoly player?
Negotiation skills.
Oh, okay.
You're
so you're
working-
thinking it's that element that she's probably the best at.
Likely working on, like, trying to overall gander properties, working on people, like, whether or not, like, they would continue to offer and bet. Say, for example, properties you can't purchase.
So
it's
reading
then put onto an
people-
auction. Yeah, it's something that causes a bit more insight for people.
Which I'd imagine if you're the daughter of David Lynch and you're also in the fine arts world like she is, coming from her father's line of tradition, she might have to be good at reading between the lines.
Not to mention, like, the constant sort of, like, use of time that it takes for Monopoly, which is, like, it
Yeah.
may be infamous for, et cetera, et cetera. That's if I had to read in a meaning,
If
though.
you had to.
If I had to. Otherwise,
She
it
just-
seems like a fun thing that both her and David Lynch, or just her, ended up thinking that this is very nice.
I'm inclined to
Let's
think
add
it was
this
just
detail.
her. I guess I don't have any reason to think David was involved in this. I like under her accomplishments, it says getting up every morning for 22 years. I'm sure there's a lot of people that could feel that.
Yep.
Another reminder that she was quite young when she wrote The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer.
Yeah.
You know, writing that book at age 22 or so.
Yes.
Quite incredible as a feat. And I still think of all this Twin Peaks expanded media, it's still the work I'd go back to as being like very, not only important for the canon, but also just very good standing out on its own. Like it's the Twin Peaks material that feels the most important narratively, but also important personally for a lot of people. So it's like, yeah, the fact that she wrote that mostly on her own as someone who is pretty young.
Yeah.
Again, as you might say, kudos.
Kudos, absolutely. It's thoroughly impressive. I think that it also potentially also aids in some of the overall younger style, if you will, being relatively a little bit older in relative scale, say, for example, from someone who would write a book to that overall length. Like, usually whenever I'm thinking of a book to that length that goes to personal journeys, authors that I'm more aware of, if you will, are inside of their overall latter years.
Sure.
Like, kind of almost like going into those reminiscing style books. I don't know many authors.
Like a memoir.
Yeah, I don't know many authors that are able to kind of get that memoir-esque tone, but also are very young while going into that memoir-esque tone. So.
Sure. If Sheriff Harry S. Truman were to write a memoir, he would state that, as it says on the card, his lifelong ambition was to finish college and return to Twin Peaks and serve the people. What do you think would be a good title for a memoir autobiography for Sheriff Truman? If you were like, imagine like a good title on that cover or on the spine.
The good that people can do.
So Bob is the evil that men do. Sheriff Truman's book is the good that men can do.
Yeah, they have the potential for goodness. It's just that he doesn't really get to experience that.
I think it'll be called Thank You, Lucy. That's what it's called. Thank You, Lucy.
Life's a drawer knob.
Life's a drawer knob. Oh, no. Turning that drawer knob to life's mysteries and wonders. The card sets up the idea that Sheriff Truman had gone off to college and had wanted to return to the people and serve in some kind of capacity. Obviously, Bookhouse Boys was one avenue for that.
Yeah.
But then also seeking law enforcement. It doesn't sound as though he was set on law enforcement his entire life. The way that in My Life, My Tapes, Cooper wanted to be an FBI agent from a very young age. And although at certain points he would dip away from the FBI, for the most part, it was a pretty consistent interest.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like Harry S. Truman had that consistency of law enforcement being the goal, but that just became the way in which he was able to, as he sees it, help people. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of discourse among the public about police officers, and especially in the United States. It's become kind of a contentious issue in the past few years. How helpful is it to be a police officer? How much good is he doing? But Sheriff Truman, in this small town in the 90s in Twin Peaks, he viewed it as a way to help people, and he also believes that he's a pretty good law officer because, as he sees it according to the card, he understands the community and their quirks. So because he understands the quirks of these people, their interests, their lifestyles, he's better able to serve them. Do you feel that Dale Cooper is not Dale Cooper. Do you feel that Sheriff Truman is a very good law enforcement officer?
I think he wants to be. I think that a lot of the value that comes from this overall card and this information, and just like from Harry, it seems that home, as well as wanting to preserve that sense of home, despite like seeking out those opportunities to see himself still grow and get that overall education and so on, those values are so important to him, and that preservation for that is so important to him, that he is willing to dedicate his life to that. And in those respects, I think that for the most part, he wants to, and perhaps he feels that he could be capable of such. I don't believe that he feels he's successful with it by the end of the series, or by the end of season 2, though. So by that ended, defeated stance, probably not. But going up and proceeding to by his own values, I think through the series at the very least, it seems consistent enough that he's trying to put forward the effort, and there's a nobility towards his efforts.
What about Andy? Think Andy's a good law enforcement officer?
No.
Oh, okay. Hey, in his accomplishments on the card, he says, I saved Agent Cooper's life, I think. Referring, I assume, to the Jacques Renault incident.
Yeah, it's a similar case where Andy, overall feels compelled to overall try to help people. He's got a nature to him that he wants to overall be of assistance, and he does feel that he can potentially do these things, judging by that overall first quote, that he's like, maybe I saved Dale Cooper's life. But on the same notion, he's someone that is kind of easily manipulated, kind of easily, brought forward from his emotions, that it can suspend his overall abilities to do what is required from his line of work. Sure. Not to mention, most of his antics inside of law enforcement that we do see is him trying to be romantically involved with a receptionist.
Yeah, I mean...
Or secretary. I'm not sure about what's Lucy's position referred to as.
I guess I would say receptionist, but she's probably both. She probably does a lot of things around that office.
Regardless, still flirtation and throwing forward the fondness with a fellow employee member.
Well, I to me it's more mutual. I don't.
It is.
If she wasn't reciprocating it, yes, that'd be very bad.
Yes, it would be very bad, but still, nonetheless, it's still in an environment in which I would say is less appropriate than, say, for example, potentially advancing
Everyone's
outside
got
of work.
workplace relationship drama. You know, it happens.
A little bit different in this case.
I do think the card's pretty sweet, though. You know, for
It's
likes,
sweet. It's sweet.
for likes, it just says Lucy. And then there's this whole dialogue where he talks very sincerely about what kind of father he wants to be and what kind of mother he imagines
And
Lucy
he
will be.
expects that, like, potentially, like, Lucy could raise their child inside of this sheriff's station.
Yeah, it's a safe place.
Like I said before, Andy has the best intentions similar to Truman. It's just the delivery of that.
Yeah, there's roads that are paved with the best of intentions, are there not?
Yeah, but the thing is that it has to be cement or some sort of like thing that it can be traversed on rather than bubble gum.
I'm referring to that a quote that maybe, I don't know if it's a local aphorism, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah,
So-
but that's
so you
still
can argue that.
but I'm still going forward in the sense of like it depends also what you're trying to put the pavement for
Yeah.
because it's a rough road for Andy for the most part.
That's fair. What about Lucy herself? I'm not going to ask if she's a good law enforcement officer because she's not an officer. I think she's good at her job, although communication style sometimes clashes with other people's communication style.
Communication style perhaps like clashes, but she still puts forward some
Very
of her
hard
overall
work.
hard work, her overall honors. She's someone who is very direct and it seems at the very least like responsible with
Yeah.
overall work. She does a lot of things for the sheriff's station.
I think in terms of the card, her likes and weaknesses are pretty interesting because we don't get a lot of time with Lucy talking about herself. We get Lucy talking about Andy, Lucy talking about Dick Tremaine, Lucy talking about Little Nicky, but not really Lucy talking about Lucy very much outside of her relationships. So for likes, she says to please others. And for weaknesses, she says, I simply don't know when to say no. So those two obviously going hand in hand, that Lucy's a people pleaser. That in that way, you can become a doormat.
Yep.
You can start allowing people to take advantage of it because you are very passive and you are just wanting to make people happy. You're trying to keep the peace, even if that means you might be making sacrifices of your own self.
Yeah.
Do you see that in Lucy in the show? Do you feel like this card is illustrating something that already is in the show? Or do you think this is another side the show hasn't really given you?
I think that for the most part, for her to sort of like have to put her foot down and so on, like she gets visibly frustrated at other characters.
Yeah.
But she kind of goes also along with antics for quite too long, if I might put forward. So
Sure.
I think it can be a fitting interpretation in a certain read, but I can
agree
see
with
someone
you.
miss it.
It's a fitting interpretation, but it's not obviously correct. It's not obviously true. I like that interpretation. I think it's an interesting way to look at the character, but I don't think the show's done enough legwork to give me that if that was the intention.
I also love the fact that she got Employee of the Month despite losing a very specific manila envelope folder with a green tab.
We've all done it.
Yep.
We've all had relationship, workplace scenarios.
Erase it, Lucy.
That was incredible. You accidentally hit that button, didn't you?
Yep.
That's incredible.
Raisin losing, get rid of it.
I can't believe you hit that button on accident. This is gonna sound scripted. Okay, listener. I was watching the professor idly tracing his finger around the buttons, like moving some dust off of them, and then just as he was going, he slid his finger over one of the 8 buttons, a 1 in 8 chance, and that was the one he pressed. You gotta understand, when the professor tries to do sound effects, he almost always hits the wrong button. He does not know what's on those buttons. Even if he was planning on it, if he was planning, he would have hit the wrong button. So that's kind of incredible.
Thank you.
Erase it, Lucy. Speaking of erasing things, Garland Briggs. Garland Briggs' card is very ominous, as seems to be a lot of Garland Briggs material. In the access guide, we had that whole part that was all redacted at the end with that letter involving the Ungwin Field Observatory.
This one has a big stamp. This is top secret at
Top
the bottom
secret.
of the at the bottom of the
So
card.
we don't even know what the rest of what he said was going to be, which again, if this is a self-guided tour through the town, are we talking to Garland Briggs and then mid-conversation he stops talking and just an ominous voice says top secret and then he walks away?
He just takes a stamp out and whoever we
Yeah.
are, just like we get
Stamps
a big
our
stamp.
head or what? Like, I'm just
You.
confused
And he
in
leaves.
universe what happened. Who is giving this information? Who is this to?
But it's okay because at the very least, like, we do get some good information from Garland Briggs, such as his first contact with aviation came at the age 8, where he flew a twin-engine plane solo,
Which
all by
is
himself.
impossible. That is not a thing
That's
that
not possible.
a human being would do.
It's heavily improbable.
Yeah.
It's
Heavily improbable.
It's at a very, very sliver of a fraction that this would ever happen.
Do
but
you in your heart of hearts, in your head canon, do you believe that Major Briggs did, in fact, fly a twin-engine plane solo at age 8? Do you believe he lied to us / the interviewer, the card? Do you believe that this was exaggerated? Do you believe the card's not canon? Do you think he was actually 12 and not 8? It makes it more believable to you?
I think he did it spiritually.
Spiritually?
No, hear me out.
Uh-huh.
When he comes back from what could be potentially the White Lodge, what gear is he wearing?
Okay, kind of like old airplane getup.
Exactly. I think that overall, the use of aviation mixed with this overall plane, perhaps there was a point of enlightenment, or like he's like lived an enlightened life in which at his youngest he was able to experience something like that, in which he had flown the metaphorical twin engine plane solo.
Okay, sure.
Okay, sure.
That's
then
a valid
explain the aero gear on that man.
I'm more just willing to say the 8-year-old thing is just kind of exaggerated because these cards are nonsense. These cards are stupid. I like them. They're fun, but these cards are just kind of silly. He also talks about being good at keeping secrets. He's good at speed reading. He's good at birthday surprises.
Which that should be a secret, right?
I guess.
You expect that to be why specifically
especially
birthdays?
Birthday surprises. That's like if Jennifer Lynch say, I'm good at board games, I'm also really good at Monopoly. Like emphasizing it further.
Life of the party.
Weaknesses. He says, I didn't listen to my own intelligence. The owls are not what they seem. Curiously, he doesn't say I don't listen. He says I didn't listen in the past tense, which makes it sound like something specific happened that is in the past that he is regretting, and then it followed by the owls are not what they seem. What do you take that to be implying?
I think that for the most part, he's someone who very much is weighed by his own personal mistakes and overall reflection. I think that the owls are so expansive that I can't tell whether or not it was the recent events with owls.
Yeah.
Or if it is something in which, like, there was a deep past that may have dealt with his overall pain with, say, for example, everything going on in Twin Peaks and what he's willing to give forward to Cooper on these. It's really, at this point, what you interpret owls to be. And at that point, we can go deeper into how he didn't listen to his own intelligence. Because as far as items go, it seems like owls are noted for being mystical, but potentially also judgmental figures.
I'm going to say put a pin in this one. This is weird because I don't
put a
consider...
pin into this one.
So here's the thing. I don't consider the cards canon, head canon-wise, and I don't know if when these cards were being made, they would have had any idea...
Oh, okay, we're going to put a pin in this, but the one comment beforehand that deals with aviation, that's the dumb part. We can just go down a little bit further to put the pin in.
Yes. Glad you understand, Professor. Those who are familiar with all Twin Peaks materials, you may know where I'm going with this. Let me put it this way, and this is, again, media interpretation. There's going to be different opinions here. I am willing to say that even though I don't consider the cards canon, if there's something fun or insightful or interesting to glean by using them as a resource or a tool, I'm not opposed to it as long as I recognize the foundation of what I'm doing. So, I don't think it was intentional, but I think something made later makes this particular part interesting. But I don't think it was intended. I don't think the people making the cards knew about it in advance, and I don't think that the person who made the newer material later looked at the cards. I kind of just think it's a happy coincidence. But I don't know. I have some suspicions about that weakness part on Major Briggs's, even though I don't think, again, it was intentional. What do you think was the top secret stuff that got removed from the card? Do you think there was a specific thing that Major Briggs started talking about, and the person who's interviewing them went, shh, no, child?
No, I think it's just generally Major Briggs is covered in secrets, and it's just emphasizing the mysteries behind Major Briggs. I don't think that there was like a specific information.
Well, no one else
shown.
gets top secret. Even like you have spiritual entities like Bob talking, and no one's like,
Yeah!
shh, don't say that.
And guess what the main difference is that one of them's a government official, in which like top secret would be fitting thematically. Maybe if you wanted like blood splatter that said top secret.
That'd be great.
Sure.
I wish that was there. That was there.
Just coat it in cream corn and just write out top secret.
As far as other government officials go, we do get a card for Albert Rosenfeld, in which he seems to be pretty self-aware. He admits that he doesn't possess strong people skills. He admits he has a disdain for small-town mentalities. He also admits that he likes French cuisine in big cities.
Yeah, so for the most part, it seems to fit with his overall philosophies and his overall demeanor. Whenever it comes to things such as this, he's someone who is very blunt, straightforward, in which... In like mentalities that I've seen in larger cities, like New York, one of the big sayings around there is it is what it is.
Yep.
Like I can see where like this overall characterization from the character comes from.
I know, like we got a decent amount of Albert, but like reading this kind of makes me wish that we had in some way gotten more ideological confrontation in the sense of not just Albert being an actual jerk, but more of that idea that Albert represents a backlash against the small town mindset, because a lot of times in Twin Peaks, small town mindset is just kind of being praised all the time by Cooper, all the time by Harry Truman, all the time by people like Doc Hayward or Big Ed or, the Bookhouse Boys in general. Having someone critical of small town mentality, I think is kind of nice. It's just usually it comes across as Albert's a jerk. I wish there was more of like, he's got a point there. He doesn't bring up a lot of points. He just kind of insults people. So I thought the card was pretty interesting because even for my own personal life, I have, in more recent years, been working around a small town community, kind of commuting back and forth. And in that small town community, my mindsets have changed over the past few years about how I think about their viewpoints and noticing the difference between that small town community life and the larger community life. I've never lived in a New York City sized city, but even between like a mid-sized city and a very small town, there's a different set of attitudes and beliefs that can happen. And at first I used to kind of view those small town elements as largely positive, and over years I've become more disillusioned by those things. So even just speaking for myself, I think there are fair things to critique about small town mindsets just as much as there are to praise, especially when it comes to American small towns. I can't comment on other countries, but in terms of American small towns, there are certain traditions that can become restraining. There are certain intolerances and prejudices that can come from a homogenous community, that's resistant to change. So I kind of wish Albert had more opportunities to flex his opposition that didn't involve like calling people chowder-headed yokels.
You hear it here, folks. Kalil wants nothing more but to show his hatred for small towns to be emphasized through his avatar, Albert Rosenfeld, and then just have a whole entire session in which Albert Rosenfeld is beating down Doc Hayward in his backwoods ways.
Ideologically. I don't need it to happen physically, just ideologically. Because Doc Hayward is a sin. The more time has passed, the more I'm like, I think I just do not like Doc Hayward. He's not like a villain. He's not like actually evil. It's just this euthanasia expert man who just likes to just passively avoid the truth, keep his family like tight-lipped about any sort of harmful questions or any sort of difficult subject matter, who just doesn't want to allow basic autopsy procedure to happen in a crime case because, it's disrespectful to the body. It's like, no, Doc Hayward, you're disrespectful to everybody. You are actively preventing truth. You are against truth, Doc Hayward, and I am against you. The truth will set you free when I blast you off into space with my rocket that I built with science. Anyway, tangent aside, Dick Tremaine. I don't have a segue.
The rocket. Here's the rocket coming in.
It has strong personality, like the fumes of exhaust coming off of a rocket ship blasting off.
Also Dick.
Balls. So Dick Tremaine lists as his strengths being an impeccable dresser, a superb dancer, a qualified clothier, and a smoker. I love Dick Tremaine's card. Anyone who likes Dick Tremaine, I think, would like Dick Tremaine's card.
I think, yeah.
His personality comes through very well.
Absolutely. I think that some of my favorites come for the fact that he's just he's so hard to express negative thoughts about oneself.
Yeah, when he's asked for
asked
weaknesses, he can't give a single weakness.
No,
he just
it's
instead
not that he can't give it. It's just more so. Here's the thing. Like, we're gonna go into it later.
Yeah.
There's actually a nice parallel here because
Yes.
beforehand, Benjamin Horne weaknesses, he just says no, none. Dick Tremaine.
Well, let's just get into it now rather than later, because that's all I really had to say about Ben Horne's card, to be honest.
Yeah, no, he just has no weaknesses.
Ben Horne says he has none, whereas Richard Tremaine has to overcompensate and explain the idea. But effectively,
not even explain the idea. It's less about saying that there's no weaknesses to it. It's just more so it's oh, that's unhealthy mindset. Let's just not consider it that way. It's like the sort of posh that away. It's gonna be fine. Let's focus on the good times, shall we?
Right.
That fits so well with the character.
Yeah, but still has that parallel to Ben Horne. Ben Horne's just way more blunt. None.
Yeah.
Nope, nothing.
No, instead he's all about the stuff I went to Eton College. It's the best, of course. But I think my favorite part about his card, absolutely, is the fact that he's recognized as the head buyer of Horne's department store. Not like the head, like anything else. Head buyer, so that seems to imply that, for the most part, he's the one also, buying the most things for himself.
He must use that discount a lot,
He must use the discount a lot for himself.
Which is funny, again, because Horne's department store, no shame against, I'm sure it's a decent place. It's not, fine apparel. It's not like this is a designer brand. This is a small town department store that sells mostly plaid and fishing gear. It's not super fancy.
It's okay.
But he prides himself on it, though.
He very much prides himself on it. He believes that he can bring forward a proper revolution to Twin Peaks in their style thanks to the resources he can find in Horne's department store. He's a great spokesman for Horne's department store, to say the least.
I just find it funny that when he's describing his strengths, he says he's a qualified clothier. No one ever uses the word clothier.
Yes, there are.
It's not a word anyone ever uses. And then one of his strengths is being a smoker. Even in 1991, I don't think people would say that's a strength. It's maybe neutral at best. It doesn't mean it's a positive trait. So I just find it funny that his status as a smoker is one of his strongest points.
Well, I would say that around the time that's taking off, I think that there still was positive association with smoking. I mean, this
cool.
It's a cool sense. This was it even was, I would say, emphasized even more than cool. Classy. It was just a classy sense. It could be even a sense of a comfortable sense. This was the age in which Fred Flintstone was advertising cigarettes.
In 1991?
Not 1991 per se, but I would say in the lifeline of Richard Tremaine, you would see an advertisement of Fred Flintstone smoking.
Well, because most of the smoking that we see in Twin Peaks is from high school kids.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's in the context of Twin Peaks. I don't think it makes smoking seem cool. It's just kind of this thing.
But in the scope of Richard Tremaine growing up and also just seeing other things in his overall world, I think it's still enough of a context.
Dr. Jacoby ends up giving us the context on Nadine Hurley. Because as he writes at the bottom of the card, quote, unfortunately, due to Nadine's current mental state, she is unable to recollect this data herself. As her psychiatrist, I have disclosed some information that has been revealed to me under hypnosis. I attest that all the information provided is true and must be kept strictly confidential. So there's things here.
Why?
One, if it's supposed to be kept strictly confidential, who is this card to? What is the context of it being shared?
Why? Even in any sort of relative sense, unless you are someone very specific to some sort of aid or help or something, why is it that he's so willing to bring forward this information, other than the fact that this is the same Dr. Jacoby that's free to insult people inside of the old rocks?
He just doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
He's made it very clear to Cooper at that cemetery scene. He really doesn't care at all.
Just not.
I don't know. What do you think of Nadine's card being this, though? Because they easily could have done a card.
They could have easily done a card. I think that for the most part, it's something that sort of like continues to like. When was this released? Like during season 2?
It was released during season 2, and like if we go by Ben Horn for comparison, who Jacoby also had been working with, Ben Horn's card is not set during the Civil War Ben.
No.
And it's not set after either, though, because he's not seeming like he's the reformed Ben at the end of the series. either genuinely reformed or faking it. Either way, he's not putting out that pretense.
Yes.
This seems like Ben before the Civil War. So I'm going to say, again, it's around that time of the killer reveal.
And it also seems to be like the age before Laura Palmer was dead. Like, even like, I'm curious on like how far do we take, say, for example, the... Oh, gods.
Well, because Maddie's not dead in the cards.
Maddie's not dead in the cards.
No one
either.
acknowledges Maddie being dead from what I remember of the cards.
Yes, they do.
They do?
Yep, Sarah Palmer's card.
Oh, okay, because Maddie's card is she's alive.
She's alive, but Sarah Palmer is...
That's true.
We'll get to that later.
She acknowledges, all those deaths.
Yep.
So timeline is weird.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere all at once. This person lives in Twin Peaks. Who could it be that wrote these cards? Maybe the person who was like outside of Twin Peaks, but also sort of like lingered about Twin Peaks and had the motivation. Maybe because we don't see a Wyndham Earl card, it was Wyndham Earl flaunting around, skipping around.
Maybe every single person interviewed was Wyndham Earl in a costume.
Yep.
Laura Palmer was just Wyndham Earl in a card. That's how Laura Palmer could answer these questions. But it was such a convincing costume, people just thought it was Laura Palmer, even though she actually died. It's amazing. Absolutely incredible. As far as Dr. Jacoby's card himself, he lists his weakness as his inability to conform to any reality base. How... Do you read that as accurate? Like, do you think Jacoby is unable to conform to any reality base?
No idea. Jacoby's already a hard person to read in general.
Because this feels like a cop-out to me. Because inability implies that he is literally not able to. He cannot help the fact that he can't conform to a version of reality, a basis of reality. And as a trained psychologist, as a licensed psychologist who goes around and tries to help people with their ideas of reality.
Help is a stretch of a word, but yes, usually that would be the profession. That would be
the professional obligation of his career.
Yes.
To say, quite frankly, on this card, who is ever interviewing him, that he is unable to ground himself in any reality, that seems to me either like he's aware of the fact that he's grossly not a good person for this kind of job, or it's a cop-out, and I'm kind of leaning toward the latter, that it's a way of excusing himself almost from it. Jacoby is an incredibly interesting character the more I think on him, because back when we were doing Season 1, we both had actually put him in our top 5 characters from Season 1. It was one of the characters we most agreed on, along with like Cooper and Audrey. We both really liked Jacoby. And then as Season 2 continued, Jacoby kind of fell by the wayside. We became to question him more and more. Then we get to all the Twin Peaks expanded material, especially the diary, where it's just anytime we ever hear of Jacoby, like you've said before, he gets worse.
Yep.
And then we get to this card here, and he's like, yeah, it's really unfortunate that I can't connect to any form of reality. And it's like, it is unfortunate, Jacoby. It is. I don't know how to feel about this, though. Like, because I think I hesitate to say he's evil. You know, I hesitate to say, because there's implications that he was involved with Laura Palmer in inappropriate ways. But I don't think we ever get the full extent of how much, right? Like, even after the Laura Palmer diary...
Any quantity could be considered. Like, the scope of
was
evil
it
is
all talk, or was there a physical element to their relationship?
But also, even outside, he still takes points in which he is using his job in a very...
Oh, don't get me wrong. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's
a horrible thing. I want to know, how bad is it?
What is the line between horrible and evil? I think that for the biggest thing that I put forward in that sake is when it becomes self-serving over like any sort of like point that could be argued like doing something important for himself. For this case,
I think it is self-serving.
I think that for the most part, the selfishness in Jacoby is the evil aspect. The amount that he's willing to
That's a good way
even
to put it.
Neglect other people for the sake of his own sort of like gain. I think that in that respect, I do recognize Jacoby as evil.
Because even in his acknowledgement that Laura Palmer's death and the mystery of it is going to be a lifelong investigation for him, I guess I read that line as being more of a personal lifelong quest inside of his mind. He's not investigating Laura Palmer's death the way that Donna, Audrey, and Cooper are.
Yes.
We never see him trying to figure out the actual real-world killer. I don't think he's interested in that. I think he's more interested on the spiritual implications of Laura Palmer's death. And in that way, I think even in Laura Palmer's death, yes, he's sad she's dead, but it feels like he almost makes it more about himself again.
Yep.
Like he still makes it his personal journey of discovery that's going to continue onward. Yeah, I think there's a sort of self-serving element that he used Laura Palmer to dive into these concepts and explorations, using her almost as a real-world guinea pig. Not that he was full-on, like, putting her in more dangerous situations, but almost by refusing to provide any more help, it almost feels like he was seeing what would happen.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard for me to read intentionality with it. We don't really get that much even after the diary in Fire Walk with Me. I don't know if he was physically involved with her, or if it was more of the idea that he was just using her as more of a psychological, spiritual resource.
Yeah, as far as items go, whenever I think of something for, like, in truth, whenever it comes to, like, serving oneself, I think that it's always important to still aid oneself and, like, overall treat oneself. I'm not saying, like, you have to be, like, the saint sacrifice, like, put away everything. I'm saying in the more so of the respects that if your goals are just simply centered around yourself, that is going to compromise other individuals,
especially
for the
in
sake
a
of
field
such.
like what he's doing.
Yes, that
in
is
the field of psychology.
Yes.
Oh, it's really bad. It's really gross. And for his strengths on the card, he says that it's his strength to be able to view the world through his rose and aqua-colored glasses, quote, thereby balancing the right and left side of my brain. So again, not conform to reality, but balanced. He believes his strength is that somehow, through the colored perceptions of his glasses, he views the world in a balanced or truer way. What do you make of that?
I think that for the most part, he, at the very least by his own personal biases, puts himself at so much of a disconnect that any sort of, like, film that could be put forward by the logical or the whimsical of the mind, that he can absolve himself from something such as guilt. He can absolve himself from these overall areas, that he can just simply be an observer for the most part.
I feel like he sees the good and the bad, the high and the low and everything, but to the point where it washes over into an apathy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he sees all these different aspects, but instead of it motivating him to do something, he sees everything as both good and bad, so he kind of just doesn't care at the end. Like, he doesn't really have the initiative to do good anymore, it feels like.
Yeah.
But also, he doesn't have the initiative to do bad. Like, he's not outwardly, like, a crime man. He's not outwardly over there hurting other people.
Crime man!
But anyone who tries to rely on him, he inadvertently ends up hurting them.
Yeah.
By failing to help, if not actively making their conditions worse. There's an argument to be made that maybe for Johnny and Ben Horn, maybe he's helped them in some tangible ways. I think that's debatable. I think Ben Horn got out of it, but is it because of Jacoby? Like, do you believe that Jacoby was the solution or was the cure? How important was Jacoby in getting Ben Horn out of his Civil War funk?
At the end of the day, he puts things in the overall motion, and for the most part, kind of like lets things go and lets things handle themselves.
Yeah.
Perhaps he has some experience that he's actually able to be an expert in some of these fields, but for the most part, like, a lot of what Jacoby does is very hands-off.
Yeah, same with Nadine. He just lets Ben Horn reenact. He lets Nadine reenact. He doesn't, and for Johnny, he doesn't necessarily seem to come across very strongly any direction.
He's just kind of there.
Yeah.
And even, like, say, for example, like, aiding Sarah Palmer later, he's just, or, like, leading her to where she feels that she needs to go with this overall spirit or being or whatever is inside of her.
Well, we both expressed concern that if Jacoby is now the one person talking to Sarah Palmer, that's not a good resource of an outlet for the outside world. It seems like people kind of forgot about Sarah Palmer, and Sarah Palmer's card is very interesting.
I think that it's one of the most intense ones, if I may say so. It's something in which, like, she is putting forward the idea that she is a woman that, with her strength, is to be very much able to handle emotional blows, if you will, because it's within the span of, like, how short of a time where, like, she lost Sarah. She didn't lose. Well, she lost herself in a way, but she lost Laura Palmer. She lost Leland, she lost Maddie. In the scope of how long did the card say?
15 days.
15 days. Like
Yeah.
in everything that was very
In less
close
than
in
a
her
month.
overall world. Because like even like Maddie kind of like visited from time to time. The closest vicinity of her world is now like completely absent. If anything, I think the best course of action for her at this point, get out of town, go to Missoula, Montana, see your family, just because at this point she's just alone with people like Jacoby, and
the fact that
scary.
The fact that she's utilized so little in season 2, that this card is valuable information, that's sad in a way, because we should have more than a card on this. You know what I mean? Like,
We should.
It feels like we should know more about her, but this card becomes so important because it's one of the very few glances we get into her mindset. Listeners, I'd be very curious if any of you happen to know, because I don't even know where to begin to look for this, if any of the actors were involved in helping write these cards, or if it was just like writers for the show, because I would want to know, was Grace Zabriskie, the actor for Sarah Palmer, involved in this card? Were any of the actors, Richard Tremaine feels very in character. Was that actor involved in this or not? I'd be curious, because a lot of the actors in the sets would improv things. We know that the actor for Johnny, supposedly brought the Peter Pan book there. We know that the actor for Betty Briggs supposedly brought the smiley face pin for the funeral episode.
It's hard to say for the most part, because the biggest part about it is that profiles compiled by Lynch Frost Productions.
We don't know.
It could be any amount of staff members that ended up going into
So listeners,
this.
if you happen to have any guidance or just want to share your own speculation, you can reach us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com, or you can tweet at us at our Twitter handle of snakeeyedreams1. That's the numeral 1, as in one card about Sarah Palmer. And it raises so many questions.
It raises so many questions, perhaps, but the biggest thing that I take away from it is just more sadness from Sarah Palmer. Like, not only does she even just like lose all these family members, it also makes note that she was once the president of the local bridge club, but had to resign after the death of her daughter. So she's lost like a possession in a point of community.
Yep.
That she was like they lead on.
Same with
reliable.
probably the theater, because we found on the Access Guide that she and her husband had been involved in the community theater world as well. That probably also went away, I would guess.
She's likely losing connections left and right to the point that she's not exactly in much company, if
and
not
no one
good
talks to
company, except potentially Jacoby.
Except potentially Jacoby, and he is not supportive. At least to most people. Maybe this is the exception, but that's not a very good thing to hope for. Like, that's not a reliable ground here.
No.
Considering how little he helped her daughter, what likelihood is he going to help her? I don't know. It concerns me. She describes herself as being strong-willed. She describes herself as having a great deal of tolerance for pain and anguish. When I hear that phrasing, I think of Garland Briggs. She has a great deal of tolerance for pain and anguish. She can withstand a lot of suffering, which makes her an easy target, almost, for the spiritual elements of their world, because she can endure it. That's very, very, very unfortunate.
I don't know if that's the case, if you will, because I think that for the most part, yes, she is an easy target in some respects. I think for the most part, she's able to, quote unquote, tolerate it. That's why she is being constantly subdued, if you will, and set aside. Because if something is more resistance to the overall desires of overall creatures, of these overall senses of like great pain, if you will, gets away from the Garambosia. That's probably why she's less of an active target than, say, for example, Laura Palmer, who can release that overall pain in droves, or Leland, who is very emotional to release that pain in droves. That's where, say, for example, Sarah Palmer comes off more as a seer figure, and it doesn't help that it says that she has a sixth sense inside the overall card.
But even though she has that sixth sense and her weakness, she says that she is not able to see evil in the world until it is too late. She can see abstract ideas. She can have dreams. She can have these moments of possession almost.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really help her personally. It doesn't stop anything. Mm-hmm. It doesn't lead to any positive change. And if we take considerations of parallels with Cooper's mother in My Life, My Tapes, or we learn about the stuff with Sarah Palmer in the Laura Palmer diary, there's just this sense in which she was not able to really make a difference in her own life or her family's life. She was just there on the sidelines, aware of evil, but not really knowing where it was, that it was literally sleeping in the same house as her. Mm-hmm. And that's horrible. That's really horrible. The wording here, she says, considering I lost Laura, my niece Maddie, and Leland in the same month, I think I've held up remarkably well. It's just such a sad expression. And again, it's the futility of this moment. If all of these events are happening within the scope of about 2 weeks,
Yeah.
there is no way to have any idea how Sarah Palmer's really doing, because anytime you lose someone who's that close to you as your family, you don't know in 2 weeks how well you're handling it. You could be dealing with trauma for months and years. You don't know this is all happening so quickly. She lost Laura, and then like a week and a half later, she lost her husband, presumably she found out, right, that her husband had been the killer, not only the killer, but also probably assaulted her daughter. We don't know to what extent Sarah Palmer really knows everything, because we don't know how much the law enforcement's really revealed all these things. But there's a good chance if anyone in Twin Peaks knows, either were told or figured it out, it's probably Sarah Palmer, who has to reconcile the fact that she lived with Laura and Leland for all these years. All of this was happening, and she did not know, could not have known. Now they're gone, and there's nothing she can do about that. And she's lost her connections to the outside world. So for her to say in this little interview, I think I'm doing pretty good. Oh, I don't think you are. I mean, I don't want to say she's lying, but it's that, classic trope of someone saying I'm okay and really not meaning that. I have a hard time reading this card and being like, oh, well, she's fine. Well, she says she's fine. It's okay.
I don't think it's more so a lie, but more so a twisted truth that has come out of circumstance.
You can't...
Say, for example, like, again, referencing Utana for the 15th time inside this overall podcast, living inside of your overall shell, this is the truth of your reality. It doesn't make it healthy. It doesn't make it great. It's still, though, regardless, is something which she thinks that she's doing well, but her perspective on it, doing well, is not being in tears, breaking down.
And she acknowledges she depends on sedatives to numb it.
Yes.
So the best she can really muster right now is numbness.
Yay.
So I don't know. I read this card, and again, I don't really consider the cards like canon. I don't even know if the actors were consulted on this or not. But I do find a lot of this apt, and again, a great conversation point about a character the show seems to forget a lot of times, who has gone through a tremendous amount of suffering in like 2 weeks. And there are not support systems in place.
No.
Where are the Bookhouse Boys coming to help the darkness for Sarah Palmer? Who cares about the darkness in the woods to wear a cloak and carry your swords and ooh? That doesn't matter if there are people in your own community who are alone and suffering quietly, and the best person to help is Jacoby? Like, it's just so unfortunate.
It is.
And I don't know. This is where even the log lady, I think, becomes not exempt. Because we've talked before about this, the log lady was one of the very few people who seemed to really know what was going on with Laura Palmer. She visited Laura Palmer in a dream. She had that one encounter at the outside the roadhouse, but the log lady doesn't really intervene. The log lady doesn't tell anyone. She doesn't try to advocate, and she doesn't really seem that involved or engrossed in what happened. And I think people love the Log Lady within the Twin Peaks fan community, and understandably so. She's a very great character. The Log Lady intros are very interesting as a way of time capsuling the show and also contextualizing each episode. But if we think about her as a person in the community, she is someone in touch with spirituality, in touch with the Palmer family spiritually, and she is living outside the town, does not seem to communicate with Sarah Palmer, does not seem to reach out and try to offer any aid. And it's not that the Log Lady needs to, it's that Log Lady's in one of the positions where she probably could do something.
Yeah,
there's a lot of people who could and then don't. Does Donna check on Laura's mom? I mean,
I think the log lady is in like that sort of absence or like muddled water, mainly because she is one of the more mythical senses inside the overall community, holding on to the log. I'm almost wondering if, say, for example, with the understandings of what's within Twin Peaks, potentially like the wisdom that's given from the overall log and how she sort of like follows the inside of the log, maybe there could be like a potentially philosophical question of if you warn something of a great evil and the evil action still exists amongst the individuals, is it truly able to be something where like they can be appropriately processed, if you will? Like,
so again, she ends up
supposed to be a trial and error. So being like someone who can like give like foreboding tones and being like, be careful, but is like someone who is like not allowed or like cannot act or chooses not to act. It's really like
is it a
question
choice?
Of how much? Yeah, is it a choice?
And I do kind of view it somewhat as a choice because I don't believe the log lady has no free will. I believe the log lady is a human being. I don't think she's a spiritual force.
I think the most examples of like ability to do things for herself, though, is putting pitch on Norma's overall walls, in which she's just kind of a dick.
Yeah. The Log Lady, again, if you don't have the intros and you don't really research outside the original show, she's just kind of a weird jerk. She doesn't really, and I say weird not in a demoralizing way, but more in the sense of she literally just carries around a log, refuses to talk to people a lot of the times, and then just leaves stuff on people's walls. She doesn't really seem to associate with the community. And again, you could argue that maybe the best thing that she can do at this point, because she also lost a spouse, right? She did. And her fire was more of a literal fire, it seems. But this is someone who could probably connect to Sarah Palmer.
Maybe.
Someone who has visions and dreams, has experienced such tremendous loss. But the Log Lady, the best she can do for herself is stay away. She just lives by the woods and does her own thing away from everyone.
She does, only coming in from time to time to espouse certain information, knowledge, and whatever, because she seems to be the most mortal person connected to everything that's happening. Who knows? Like, maybe it's just whenever dealing with, say, for example, these overall owls, maybe she herself might be afraid of something that might happen to her as well.
I just think it's striking that she is rendered inactive like Jacoby's rendered inactive. Very different reasons. Very different ways, very different culpability. I'm way more likely to blame Jacoby than I am the Log Lady. But both are rendered in a position where they don't really act. And I don't know. They listen. They'll warn generally, but they don't really get involved. And that's kind of a weird. I never thought of Jacoby and the Log Lady paralleling before, but here we are.
Here we are. For whatever she's even provided, whatever the log may say, whatever she can do about it. I think that's where I give more sympathy to the Log Lady, just because of the more unknowns that I see with the Log Lady than the blatant sort of like flapping of the hands of Jacoby.
Well, and also considering what goes on in those dark woods, I almost wonder how much fear the Log Lady has to constantly battle with her own soul. Because we know what kind of things can happen in those woods. She knows about the owls, and she lives outside the town in the woods.
Yep.
When she's living alone, is she doing all she can just to remain safe herself? I don't know. There's a lot we don't know about her. The speculation's fun. I enjoy speculating, and this is why I like the cards. I don't consider them canon. I don't really rely on their information, but I do think that they're great jumping off points into conversations like what we're having right now. So I do appreciate you joining me on that tangent, Professor.
That's our podcast.
This is our podcast.
This is what we do in our podcast.
Leland Palmer writes in first person. Questions. I have questions on that. Moving on. Under weaknesses, it literally just says Bob in huge caps.
Like it's
Did he
bigger
say
font.
That? Did Leland say that? Did someone else say that? Context matters.
Especially, say, for example, when it comes to Speak It in Tandem, the card that comes right before that, the Bob card, in which it says things such as, I have survived. Like, this is, again, first person
it's such
interview.
a good card.
I have survived as long as man has been on Earth. What are your strengths? I am able to inhabit human souls and through them act out evil. Punishment is the only acceptable form of retribution. And what are your weaknesses? I cannot possess everyone. Well, when's your birthday? From the beginning of time. What do you like? Nothing. What's your education? No formal education. But notably is like noted as AKA Leland Palmer. Now,
don't get me started on the AKA Leland Palmer. I got a whole thing to say about that.
AKA Leland Palmer's right up here, but Leland Palmer's birth date is a little bit off, if you will, because it says from the beginning of time, unless time started in February 26, 1944.
It's true. That's canonically when time began.
Do not hurry, Susan Mia, this bullshit.
Oh, dear. No, Bob's card is hilarious. If I take it seriously, I have to deal with all these lore implications. If I take it as one giant joke, it's very funny. But yeah, the idea of I have survived as long as man had been on Earth, that implies that Bob is, like thousands and thousands of years old. But it's also the idea that Bob may have begun with mankind, that Bob may be inextricably linked to mankind. So as long as man has been there, Bob has been there too, not before. And then maybe when man goes away, Bob leaves too, probably. And then the strength section, inhabit human souls and through them act out evil. that doesn't fully explain who's in control with Leland, and I think that works as a vague way to define it. He inhabits them, he doesn't possess them, but then he does say, I cannot possess everyone, so maybe I'm reading too much into the fine wording here. Maybe it means the same thing, I don't know.
Yeah, he says he acts out.
Is inhabiting the same as possessing?
It's that is the fun part. Whatever you want to think Bob is, at that point, you can push forward the amount of autonomy. I think that we already went through that fun rabbit hole when it came to Fire Walk with Me. Yeah, I thought you would be me, but you didn't know it was me.
Yeah, thank you for that recreation. But the line about punishment is the only acceptable form of retribution. Bob never talks about that, right? Like anywhere else, retribution and punishment. He definitely in the diary makes Laura feel awful about herself and judges her. But I view that as more of a psychological tactic. I've always viewed that in the diary as being Bob is trying to demoralize and harm Laura and feed off of her suffering. I don't think he's literally over here with like a judge's mallet and like at the stand in the courtroom judging her morally and saying, your pain is punishment and it is the only way to acceptably give retribution. I don't view him as a judge and arbiter of any sort of law. Well, I view him as lawless.
I'm not sure, necessarily lawless. I would say that in terms of whatever cosmic entity you want to put Bob through, Bob seems intrinsically tied to something such as the Black Lodge, if you will. Something meant to overall process and judge creatures and so on. Maybe the sense of retribution is just more so of a general idea of retribution.
But who is Bob punishing and dealing out retribution to? Leland, Laura, Maddie?
Humanity.
Humanity. By inhabiting small town families?
It is really interesting on the overall choices of hosts that Bob has, but on the same token, I think that there are likely more instances than just Bob out there.
I feel like there
are areas in which Bob preys on something specific in these individuals. I don't think that these people are just mundane if they could be anybody, but I think it's just more so specifically from these traits that they exhibit, if you will. We could probably put out a common line of what Bob is and why Bob brings these people
I feel like there's
in.
different jumping off points to different interpretative lenses for Bob that we've brought up before, but you can view Bob in X number of different ways, and this leans into a way that I don't personally view Bob in as much, in the sense that I don't view Bob as a punishing retribution type figure. I view Bob as a parasite who wants to feed off of people's suffering, not saying that people deserve the suffering, not using the suffering for any form of justice. I think he just gets off on suffering. So I view him less morally arbitrating and more animalistic. But I don't think they're incompatible. It's just that's where I lean more usually.
I think that it might not even be for a sense of justice. Retribution doesn't have to be something in which someone has a moral high ground. It is simply something for righting something that was an incorrect statement, almost putting them onto a different track. Which again,
it brings balance to the force.
It brings a force that will try to overall, say, for example, fit something into a mold, and if it doesn't, has to be discarded. I think that, again, that's fitting for the Black Lodge, just trying to see if they're going to be shoved into the White Lodge square hole, and if not, they're going to try to break them through it until they are just pieces of themselves that might just slop out of the hole instead. Oh, well, on to the next one.
The idea that Bob likes nothing is interesting. That means that Bob does not even enjoy suffering. Bob doesn't like killing people. Bob doesn't like anything. That's interesting. I'm going to chew on that in my head for a while because I feel like there's different ways you can interpret that. I'm not going to say it's incompatible with the show, but I guess usually I think Bob is portrayed as having delights and joys. Even the way Mike/One-Arm Man kind of describes him, it feels like he enjoys things. But Bob, to his own words, and why would I disbelieve him? He's an honest man. Man? Question mark. Bob says he enjoys nothing. He likes nothing.
I think that,
or maybe he likes nothingness.
I think
he likes the void.
I think the performance creates a man that is very much seemingly vicious, but the agendas are very interpreted, or the moods are very interpreted by people who are on the outside. Say, for example, people are freaking afraid of, say, for example, bugs, or they're afraid of sharks or something.
Is this an attack on me?
I said sharks. I said sharks as well. Okay. They're in the same camp. and they'll look at them, and
They
they
are in
will
the same camp. They're both dangerous.
and they will make judgments on them on like what their overall intentions on whatever like
Sure.
moralities that might be behind it, and potentially demonize them in a way that makes them a ferocious and horrifying force. Though Bob is in a situation where, say, for example, like everything is blank and is like an unmoving sense of that, I think that having an entity that is so emotive, that is so chaotic, and come forward with that, people will make all sorts of assumptions onto Bob, but whatever Bob is already on like a whole entire like nth level of different existence that it's unfair to try to judge him on towards that sort of like
It's unfair. Justice for Bob, you know?
Not justice for
It's
Bob.
time. It's time Bob gets to tell his side of the story, you know?
Regardless, it's something in which I can see like people trying to gander or sort of like find Bob. But at the end of the day, what Bob is a being that is fear-inducing, and one method
Yeah.
of that is having this Joker-like figure, if you will, cackling inside the corner, if you will, being chaotic in his own sense.
That AKA Leland Palmer really gets to me, because the card for the closest thing we have to Bob is so confusing. So there's a card that on the front says the One-Armed Man. On the back, it says Philip Gerard. Just like with
It's
the
just
bird.
like the bird. Just like with the
bird.
bird.
I'm assuming that Philip Gerard is the more specific name for the One-Armed Man. You with me so far?
Yeah, it's a bird.
Okay, here's
He's
the
a
problem.
bird.
Here's the problem.
AKA is Mike.
Here's the problem.
Ack-a-Mike.
Here's the problem. If Philip Gerard is the more specific name for the One-Armed Man, I'm cool with that. Then it says AKA Mike. If we go back to Bob, Bob's AKA is Leland. So does that mean that Bob is to Leland as Philip Gerard is to Mike?
Here's the thing, like, I would say that we're back to square one, but we never left, like, our space on the board to move ahead or go backwards. We're in the same spot
I'm just
here,
so
like,
lost.
on whether or not, like, how to interpret. This is
Is
not
Philip
moving us
Gerard-
anywhere.
Because Philip Gerard, there's no, like, we see Leland and Bob as two different actors. Bob can be seen in Dale Cooper's reflection. The way that Bob looks, we're never clarified. Is that Bob's true form, or did Bob at one point possess someone that looked like this, and now Bob looks like this?
You're talking to, like, and as far as, like, Philip Gerard goes, like, there's no, like, transformation like Bob.
What I'm
if
getting
you
at,
will.
yeah, is that Philip Gerard, the One-Armed Man, well, okay, the One-Armed Man just like a name, like a nickname, which, unfortunately, I don't think that that's the best way to describe a person, is based on their, like, physical differences.
But we then go into Fire Walk with Me, in which, like, there is, like, an idea of, like, being
See,
the
is
one-armed
Philip
man
Gerard
as opposed
the
to
man
the
that
one arm.
is Philip Gerard the man that Mike is possessing, or is Philip Gerard the same person as Mike? Is what I'm really getting at.
Yeah.
Because Bob and Leland aren't the same person.
As
By
far
most interpretations, there's ways to read it that Bob doesn't even exist. But by most interpretations, Bob and Leland are not the same person. Bob is inhabiting Leland.
Yeah.
Is Mike inhabiting Philip Gerard, or are they the same person? Because these cards are confusing me.
I think that these are the same questions that were already on the table. It's just that now the cards are on the table with that same.
The cards are on the table and they don't help us.
They don't. I don't
It's
think
like
that
Jacoby.
I don't think they could help us.
These
really.
cards are like Jacoby. They just confuse us more.
But the thing is that what we can see from them, I think, is the most interesting thing. And there are some answers here. Maybe not with Philip Gerard here. I think Philip Gerard is one of the situations where, like, you have accomplishments. I live to tell about Bob. Strengths. I can tolerate Bob. Weaknesses. Without my drugs, I'm Bob's familiar. Which, mind you, I think paints a light on towards a character in which at first may have seemed like once like people that were like side by side, if you will, acting in tandem. Well, this
Professor?
one seems to put him in the lower rung. But
Professor,
yes,
this card, the Philip Gerard Mike card, has a birth date.
yeah,
1938.
yep.
Okay, I'm assuming... Okay, the interviewing style where it says, I live to tell about Bob, I can tolerate Bob, that sounds like Mike talking.
So, but yeah, and that's fine.
But
Like,
that's not Mike's birth date, that's Philip Gerard's.
But here's the thing, though. Is that a birth date of someone who could be canonally like Philip Gerard as the person? Or was that the day that he separated from the arm?
So his birth date is the day the arm got separated, you think?
Maybe.
1938?
I
I
don't-
think it's just Philip Gerard's.
I don't know who Philip Gerard is, though.
Philip Gerard's the salesman, the shoe salesman.
Isn't that the one-armed man who is just absent of the one arm, could only possess people with the one arm? There's a lot of questions that come up with specifically Philip Gerard.
He's so confusing. And, like, the use of the drugs as haloperidol, which is a lot of times, again, as the show is mentioned, used for like schizophrenia. There's a way you could read, potentially, with some of the material, Philip Gerard might just be a regular dude who's got spiritual connections that overlap with like a mental diagnosis like schizophrenia. He just has access to this world. But then things in Fire Walk With Me, especially so far, kind of run counter to that, where it's like, is this a man with spiritual connections? Or is Mike as old as Bob? Is Mike part of Bob? What does it mean when he says, without my drugs, I'm Bob's familiar?
And might I just let you know, like, as far as all these characters are presented, as far as all these important individuals are, every single card's important and none are extra cards.
Right.
Let's just assume that
there's a
going
pine
forward.
cone card for a reason.
There's a pine cone card for a reason. Out of these 76 cards, we have all these individuals, especially when it comes to, like, the one-armed man, Bob, the giant, if you will, Pierre, freaking Pierre.
Mm-hmm.
The man from another place is absent, which
Yes.
I would argue is a very big sort of, like, individual when
you
it
have a
comes
very
to,
good
like,
point. I did not think
conversation.
about.
And the fact that we're talking so much about the one-armed man as opposed towards the one arm as is, the omission almost is
I am
notable.
the arm.
The omission feels almost notable.
It does.
Whether or not, like, you start, like, paralleling it into the Philip Gerard or not.
We also
I
don't
know
have the
too.
waiter man, do we?
We don't have the waiter man, but there's
Senior
implication. We have implications that he's connected to the giant.
Yes.
So,
I don't know. Yeah, the presence of the presence of the giant and the absence of the man from the place. Really curious. The whole I am the arm thing. It's questionable.
Yes.
With the giant card.
which, by the way,
Oh,
the biggest part I gotta bring up, like, with the giant card.
Okay.
Can you guess which one?
for me, it's the education section.
Which would be?
White Lodge.
Exactly.
This is the only, again, if you consider this canon,
If you consider this a
this
canon
is the
thing
only
coming from
confirmation of the existence of the White Lodge.
Coming from, at the time, compiled by Lynch Frost Productions, whoever was in charge of it, whoever was writing it, whatever, like,
This is
notes
kind
that
of
we're taking
huge.
from.
Because in the actual show, Hawk tells of a story of the idea of a White Lodge, a place of perfection. And in order to get there, you have to pass through the Black Lodge, which tests your courage. And if you have perfect courage, you can go to the White Lodge. We have Wyndham Earl, who says there was this place called the White Lodge. It was awful. But don't worry, there's also a place called the Black Lodge. He makes the White Lodge seem like a thing of the past. We don't have any proof of the White Lodge because all we get with Cooper's ending in season 2 is the Red Room, which seems awfully sinister toward him.
Yes.
It's even unclear, is that the Black Lodge or is this just the waiting room in between? It's curious, it's uncertain. The Black Lodge a lot of times feels more real than the White Lodge. The best we got is maybe Major Briggs went there.
Yeah.
Major Briggs sitting on his weird throne, stone chair. Major Briggs with the messenger on the threshold. What is happening here? But this literally says on the card,
If we are-
by the way, in a very funny spot, Education White Lodge. Oh yes, my times at university, learning the powers of the universal goodness.
Is that like and there's points like sections like this can be omitted. Like there's no nickname for them, and there's no like this or that information.
No, but they still chose to put it.
They chose two pieces, and that's birth date and education for the specific card. So
Birth date's unknown. Not that he doesn't have one, it's just not known.
it's not known.
I will say again, I do not consider the cards canon. So, to be honest with you, when I read this and it says Education White Lodge, I actually don't believe it necessarily.
And as far as items that I go forward with, I'm using these as potential lenses. They're canon feel.
This to me, this
the
doesn't.
biggest part that this
Yeah.
feels like, it feels like a lot of these are like notes with flavor, if you will. Like there may have been at a point an intention that, like, say for example, ideas like this
Yeah.
may have been at this sort of point, and they rolled with it. I do think that there's influence from individuals, as we've seen with the cards,
Yeah.
including Lynch and Frost, just judging from the overall styles their cards do bring forward.
Yes.
But at the same notion, like there is a piece of me that just wonders, like, how when these overall like notes and ideas existed. There's a
Yeah,
firm
who wrote
curiosity
them
with
when they were made? Because we've seen things in these cards change. Wyndham Earl's whole reason for coming to Twin Peaks got retconned and changed.
Yes.
That even happened in My Life, My Tapes. Changed the reason for the stuff going on with Teresa Banks. Changed a lot of that stuff.
Yep, and
Things
then-
can change.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go on a little tiny tangent. I'll try to keep as brief as I can, but this is a tangent kind of podcast, so bear with me here. There is a video game series called Final Fantasy, and a pretty popular Japanese video game series. And Final Fantasy VII is probably the most popular one. It's set like in a more modern day age kind of setting. Final Fantasy X came out a few years later, set in like a more fantasy setting. And when 10 got a sequel, confusingly titled 10-2, that game had a connection of like an Easter egg where there's this character who had the same name as the corporation that had a bunch of like evil stuff going on in 7. My point is, there was an Easter egg in the game. Then, in this like ultimate guide that was made, one of the scenario writers for both 7 and 10, Nojima, he was asked about these connections, and he just bluntly states, yep, the worlds of 7 and 10 are connected. These two games that seem completely separate storylines, they are in fact part of the same shared universe. And I bring this up because for like almost 2 decades since, people still debate this interview and if this is actually like proof. And I was watching a video today talking about it again, where someone brought up, yep, the scenario writer confirmed it. It is canon now. I don't buy that way of thinking about things.
Yeah.
To me, it's an Easter egg in the game until it becomes more than an Easter egg. I think it's fun to speculate. I love speculation.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can prove it.
I think that
that's the fun of speculation, is it's not provable.
I think that the biggest sort of like defender to it is in like, say for example, prior to moving into the next room, if you will, where Cooper like is sitting down with, say for example, Giant and the one-armed man and so on, is that afterwards we do see the one-armed man in a more crazed form, but we do not see the reappearance of the Giant. We just see him in the prior room beforehand. Whether or not like the Red Room could be confirmed as an overall waiting room before he's shunted off to a Black Lodge in which like uses aspects of the familiar. That's where, like, say, for example, you can start to speculate, but that's at the end of the day where it is. Speculation.
I'm still not convinced the White Lodge exists or that the Giant's part
or
of
that's
it.
an education.
Yeah, that's an education. By this card, that doesn't prove it to me. Even if I found out that Mark Frost himself wrote that, it's not in the show. I would still question it. But I also just want to say these cards add fuel to the fire. Pun very much intended. They had fuel to the fire of this discussion.
Yes.
Pierre Tremond, you mentioned, had a card. We do get some context potentially for him.
He hates yellow food and dislikes cream corn.
Wonder why that is. He says, I am one of the youngest master magicians being capitalized, the M's, who can make himself disappear. I have perfected the sleight of hand trick, producing a red rose, utilizing only one petal. The most concerning thing that I find, again, I laugh at, I find funny, but it has implications, is that for education for him, it lists Twin Peaks Elementary School, which would imply
he goes to school.
That Pierre goes to school. That Pierre could realistically go to school with, like, Donna's younger sister.
Yeah.
They could just casually have a class together.
And then they casually disappear, like Donna's little sister did. It all comes together.
I have always interpreted Pierre Tremond, the old lady grandmother Tremond, and the Chalfants from my I was gonna say My Chemical Romance. That's a band that just had a song come out in the first time in 10 years.
Yay.
But man, what is it called? Fire Walkaby. Why don't know what I'm talking about? I'm losing my mind. Fire Walkaby. My point is, I've always interpreted those to be like spiritual entities. Like they're there, but they're not there. They're like the Giant showing up to give a message. I didn't interpret that Pierre is a regular human child who has chores, homework, can get a scraped knee.
And is one of the, like, great magicians of the world.
What is this? Mm-hmm. And who's talking to this child on the self-guided tour? Did you just walk up to him?
Yep, just, like, ignore, like, his overall grandmother.
I just don't
and
get
just
it.
like say, hey kid, how's it going? You are in a fancy suit. Could you tell me something? I'm trying to make a deck of cards.
So if these cards are canon to you, Pierre is a real person who goes to school in Twin Peaks, just the same way that Mark Frost coaches a baseball team.
And notably dislikes Scar Ambrosia.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
not a fan,
like,
likes to disappear.
Like the creamed corn aspect. Like, I don't know how this child feels about pain and suffering, but creamed corn has been attributed.
Maybe the problem isn't pain and suffering, it's just cream corn specifically. Which, what child likes cream corn? Listener, if you liked cream corn as a child, please email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com or tweet at us at snakeeyedreams1@gmail. It's not a Gmail, it's a Twitter. At the Twitter, as in 1, the numeral, as in Only one human child has ever liked cream corn, and that was little Nicky, who we already know is the devil. Margaret Lanterman was a former candy striper. What does that mean?
That means that she puts stripes on the candies.
What does that mean?
You know how like there's stripes on candies?
Like
Candy
corn?
Like candy
Not
canes.
corn. Candy canes?
Candy canes, like those little peppermints. They like those
Is this
lines
an
don't
actual
come from
thing?
anywhere. You gotta stripe those candies.
Is that a real thing,
you gotta
Professor?
stripe those candies. You gotta line
Professor,
them up. You gotta make those stripes.
Am I?
Where do you think the stripes come from? They don't come from the ground. They
I
stripe
assume when you
those.
make the candy, like it swirls or something.
Yeah, and guess what? Someone's got to swirl that together. They
But
got to
that's
stripe
the candy
that.
swirler, not the candy striper.
Like,
it
it's-
makes it sound like it's like an Alice in Wonderland. Someone took a little paintbrush and put little stripes in all
No,
the candy
no,
canes.
there's like cool little machines, little chopping blocks and so on, that after you sort of like shape and mold it and get the stripes ready, you then chop them apart. Chop, chop, chop.
Well, we know that she has good forearms because on the Log Lady card it says strengths my forearms. We know Wyndham Earl showed the potential strength of her like ability to hit people with a log. Good to know the real Log Lady can do the same thing.
Potentially the same thing.
Potentially with a
She
with
may
a
do it
non-triangular
worse.
log. Yeah, it might be worse.
Yeah, she could have killed him.
Bobby wouldn't have had a head if it would have been the real Log Lady.
Bobby Briggs turns into Bobby Diggs, his own grave.
Yes. Yes. Also, weaknesses. Rugged, good-looking men. Saplings. I love that Log Lady has that. Maybe that's why she stays out of town. She's got to keep herself away from all the hotties.
But there's saplings everywhere in the forest.
That's true. That's
She has
true.
to trade
She's
one
really-
sacrifice for another.
She's in between two worlds, man. Like, it's tough. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Stuck between rugged, good men and saplings. I'm going to start using that phrasing instead of rock and a hard place. I'm sure it's going to be very self-evident what I'm trying to explain and express emotionally. Yeah, man, it's been really tough lately. I feel like I've been stuck between rugged, good-looking men and saplings. That communicates the same message, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
We know that the magician boy does not like cream corn. The card also says for Laura Palmer that she likes potato pancakes with cream corn topping, which I don't know about you, but that's ruining perfectly good potato pancakes if you ask me.
It's also doing something else, isn't it?
It's smothering cream corn.
Garambosia.
Yeah. In weaknesses, she says that she's afraid of Bob. Again, is she actually saying this? Because she doesn't openly talk about Bob.
Maybe that's why she won't approach the house. She's afraid of Bob. Because, like, that's where Bob lies. If she's interfering when Bob says, nah, don't do that, I don't think Bob would spare the Log Lady. Personally.
I don't know. Speaking of people not being spared, Madeline Ferguson has a card here. She speaks in first person present tense as though they got her in an interview before she died. But then Sarah Palmer's card, she is dead. So I don't know what to do with that.
Stop with the timelines. You already know you're going to suffer.
I'm going to suffer. I'm going to produce my own Garambosia by the end of this podcast. She says that for accomplishments, I have a job in my own apartment in Missoula. I value my independence. She says that Laura and her were close, so close in the past, that as the older cousin, she'd give Laura advice and moral support, quote, often. So that would seem to imply a closeness that maybe wasn't 100% solidified in the show, but was backed up more in the diary that there was a sort of closeness. Even if we don't have it frequently happening, there's a sense of Laura seemed to really look up to Maddie. That is true. She says that she is, in fact, however, not anything like Laura. Do you think Maddie is like Laura?
Yes.
She says she's not like anything like her, though.
But she is played by Cheryl Lee. Both cards say so.
But that doesn't mean they're like each other. You could have identical twins, and they just happen to...
You want to know the difference?
There's a good twin and an evil twin.
You want to know the difference,
Yeah.
Kalil? Is that the twins are usually playing by different people.
Identical
Not the same
twins.
person.
Identical twins. Identical twins are played by the same actor in real life, too.
Look, we can go back and forth on like Full House, the fact that twins played one character, and if you could put one character into two people, is that just the reverse Uno card on that? I don't know. But as far as like items are concerned, she does seem to be a little bit more overall innocent and empathetic if you recognize Madeline as a separate character.
She seems almost like not much of a character, to be honest.
She seems like someone who has focus and insight and more freedom than the baggage that Laura Palmer carries.
Yeah. Maddie is an interesting case where when we were watching it, I mean, the original run of the show, your first time viewing it, you were convinced that Maddie was Laura. Real Maddie actually had died.
Yeah.
That Laura had been pretending to be dead as Maddie this whole time. As time has gone on and you've been able to like settle with the fact that that is not what appears to have happened. No, the return is coming up. Maybe you're going to be proven right all along. But as of right now, you've had many months to settle for the fact that Maddie Ferguson was a separate character who got killed by Leland Palmer. What do you feel about Maddie as a character? Like now that time has passed.
At this point, it's hard to feel anything. Maddie is a character that we got to explore a little bit further. We got to have Cheryl Lee put up some acting chops. But for the most part, it seems like up to the point that like she was killed off by Leland, it almost felt like kind of having a chance to see things in the action. She felt like more so a device to push forward other characters than she was a character.
She was
herself.
there to affect Donna and James more than she was there to be her own character.
And again, I think work with the story, maybe not as intended, but still working the story as someone who to be sacrificed by Leland Palmer in order to show, hey, this is as far as like Leland's willing to go. Remember, this is the person that killed his own daughter.
Yeah, it's hard for me to think of Maddie as her own separate character because even then, on her card, all she really says is, "Yep, I have an apartment and a job."
I think
cool. That's not really much of a personality. Like that's just you did those accomplishments. You have
it's
independence. Good.
Such a very interesting choice, a very specific choice to put Maddie, and Laura. And have them be played by the same actor.
Yep.
When we have seen siblings that do exist separate.
Well, and there's also the idea that they're not even like siblings; they're cousins.
They're cousins. Still,
you usually
some
don't have
like
identical
different
cousins.
relations. You don't usually have identical
and
cousins.
it's also the idea that in the Invitation to Love, there was already that idea of the identical people, the Jade and Emerald stuff. So it feels like Maddie was there for thematic elements and for character relationships more than being her own independent character. And I don't think the card fleshes her out enough to make her feel more distinct either. She's pretty neutral even in her card. Mm-hmm. There is some Donna here. She was voted most likely to succeed by her senior class. Do you think Donna's most likely to succeed?
I think that actually this paints a very nice light because the thing is that we have Laura Palmer being the prom queen, if you will. What sort of company does she bring forward? Well, to have someone as this overall, like, very ambitious individual that's slightly also as popular as Laura Palmer, maybe less so, but still around that area. I never thought of Donna in that light before. Mm-hmm. Like, for the most part, we don't get to see them interact with other kids in school.
We know of one of her sisters being a poet. One of her sisters sings. Yeah. We don't really get a lot of Donna's accolades and talents as much.
Yeah, so in truth, it's a fun bit of world building that I wasn't even considering.
She is the daughter of a doctor of a very like well-to-do family, very well respected in the community. Yeah. Seems to have strong support from both her parents. Yeah. So it seems like Donna had all the elements of a traditional good upbringing. And to her classmates, she just seemed like she had a good head on her shoulders. Yay! They didn't really know what was going on with Laura, but neither did Donna for that matter. Mm-hmm. And then James's card. So first of all, Donna's likes, it says likes James, which for the Andy liking Lucy, I was like, aw. For Donna liking James, I'm like, And then for James's card, it doesn't say likes Donna. James's card says likes Harley Davidson motorcycles. And
look, Lucy's card didn't say Andy either.
No, but I do think it's very funny. I laugh at the idea where it's like Donna interviewed is like, yeah, I really like James. And then they turn to James. James, what do you like? Harley Davidson motorcycles. And it's just very funny to me, the contrast between the two of them. I get that you're right. Lucy also doesn't match Andy in that way. Mm-hmm. I just find hers more interesting and evocative of her character, whereas Donna and James, I'm kind of just laughing at them. That's just bias.
That's just the bias that we've grown up with as we continue to watch Twin Peaks. But
you immediately didn't like James and Donna. That was not like a later thing.
I can fester on it over, like, I can grow into more festering.
I remember seeing this tweet at one point, again, and I don't remember where it came from, but this tweet suggesting the idea that, you know, to be able to talk about Twin Peaks, you must first have loved it unconditionally every aspect.
Why?
I'm with you. I completely disagree with that idea at all. Because you and I both have expressed that in our initial viewings, we were not fans of James and Donna. Maybe one day that'll change. Maybe one day we will love James and Donna. But I think the discovery of our, being able to work through our reasons for liking and disliking something, being able to have our own opinions independent of the show, doesn't mean we don't love the show.
I think that love comes with those sort of aspects of being able to critique and overall just weigh things and feel passionate about them. Maybe it's not always in the same case, and sometimes in a broader appeal. For example, I would say that you love movies, and the way that you approach movies is a way that you can overall express that form of love. It doesn't mean that you love that specific piece of media, but still you do bring it forward because of your overall fondness for movies. Twin Peaks is expansive enough, and we've played with each individual episode and each individual piece of media, that I do feel that that's somewhat of a similar lens, if you will, as we're analyzing each of the pieces, if you will, to the point of we can express overall fondness of a piece of material or the medium that it's from, and still come out of it and be a fan and not have to love everything about it in the fashionable sense of everything's good, everything's great, I'm having a great time today.
You and I are both fans of Bobby Briggs, who was voted most handsome his senior year. He was listed as having strong leadership qualities, as well as being, quote, very successful with chicks.
Yay.
Yay. This section that comes on this card, I was laughing about how on the nose this is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, maybe it's just me that finds this funny, but it says, quote, I do not study much, and, for that matter, hate going to class. I prefer to take shortcuts on success. And it reminded me, because it's so on the nose, right? For him to say that so much self-awareness, so bluntly, it reminds me of when you're doing personality inventories or personality quizzes on a computer.
Yeah.
Or it'll say something ridiculous. It'll say agree or disagree. And then it'll give you a statement I enjoy when others who are better off than me suffer. And it'll say yes or no. And you're looking at that and you're squinting your eyes what are you asking me to say yes to? Are you trying to find out if I'm a supervillain? What are you trying to do to me? That's what it feels like when I hear someone say, unironically, I prefer to take shortcuts to success.
Yeah.
No one ever says that about themselves.
Bobby Briggs says that.
Most people who take shortcuts to success don't acknowledge it like that. And I don't think Bobby Briggs in the show seems to be the kind of person who feels that way about himself.
Would you come off to say that Bobby Briggs would be the most handsome in his class?
I think that me commenting on the hypothetical appearance of fictional high school teens played by actors in their 20s of the male gender is not my highest quality. I don't think I'm good at that.
But would you say that it's very fitting that
we
with
see
the best
very
friend,
few high school boys in this school?
Laura Palmer, again, being the prom queen, is being
Right.
some highly idealed, having the most promising best friend in the overall group, and taking the most handsome person to the prom.
Right.
It's all very fitting,
It's
isn't
all
it?
very set up to be the typical American, sweetheart situation.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense for that sort of context. I also think this card is nonsense, not just because of him acknowledging taking shortcuts to success feels so out of character for Bobby. His nickname in this card is Briggsy.
Yeah.
Not
Good old
Bopper.
Briggsy.
Not Bopper. The moment it says Briggsy is his nickname and not Bopper, I'm like, you didn't ask him. You didn't really talk to Bobby. This isn't Bobby. This isn't Bobby talking about himself taking shortcuts. Who is Briggsy? And what is he doing? Why does he want to lie and manipulate everything like this? There's also no Mike Nelson card.
No.
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 Why?
Why would you have Mike Nelson?
He's still on the storyline. He could talk about Nadine and Bobby.
Okay. I would say that from the characters that we received from it, I don't think that there was a character that was either... There wasn't a point where I would say Snake Nelson was more important than what we got. I think that there's a neutral line we could argue with.
Leo Johnson gets a card, and he was basically unable to respond vocally, and throughout all of season 2.
But stop saying how they can't do something at certain times. Laura Palmer's a card. We're already at the point of weird timelines. But no, Leo Johnson still was a very large part of the overall story, and I would not parallel him with freaking Snake.
Okay. I will not go on about it. I'm just going to make the general statement with Leo Johnson's card. Who is writing this and when? I will say no more. Quote, Leo Johnson. With the money I saved from my paper route and various other capital ventures, I was able to buy my own 16-wheel rig by the time I was 20. I've driven across the country over 100 times, but never with Shelley. We learn that Leo Johnson was a hall monitor in high school. I think you can really read into that one. Says he's been a good provider to his wife, but a bad judge of character, who at times, he admits, lets his temper get to the best of him. You know, I hate to see it happen. He likes ice cream, birthday cake, and money. Leo Johnson's card is very funny. I don't know what to make of it. I have a lot of questions I could ask.
Again, like, we don't see Leo Johnson outside of people that he would be, say, for example, in opposition or would be
afraid
in Leo's
of him.
way.
Actively being afraid of him.
Afraid of him. But if you were to sit him down and be in likable terms and he's getting what he wants, this sounds like something that I could see from a Leo Johnson. But the thing is that we just see him inside of his mostly angry form. And sure, he might overall see, like, the situation of, like, his wife being, like, things that would, like, stress him out and so on. But he's probably still, I think, confident enough with what he's doing to say, yeah, I'm a good provider for my wife before he starts flinging the soap.
I find it funny that this has to bend over backwards as a card to tell us he likes ice cream and birthday cake. You know, a thing that I can imagine Leo... I really can't imagine Leo Johnson as serious as he always portrays himself. Ask, what do you like in life? I like ice cream and birthday cake. I just can't. Such a childish answer. Nothing wrong with liking those things. I just don't imagine Leo saying that. But anyway, let's say he does. It has to then explain the implication that when Shelly and Bobby got the birthday cake and they put all the birthday stuff on Leo.
But not ice cream.
No, it's not ice cream, but it was birthday cake. That is something Leo normally loves. So they were not being mean to Leo. Leo loves birthday cake. That is true. Maybe this is how Leo spends all his birthdays. With the little hat and everything. And the kazoo.
Everything that we get from bonus material Leo Johnson continues to be heavily interesting to me. Because the sheer lack of, like, these atmospheres that Leo is granted.
Right. It's like almost like a different character.
Yes.
Completely. Shelly Johnson has a card. She says that she can't really think of anything she's achieved. Aw. Then she goes on to say that she tries to be a good wife and a hard worker. Thinks she's a good waitress. She says that maybe one day Norma might let her become manager, and that'd be an accomplishment.
She says that she should have stayed in school and gotten a little bit mature before marrying.
She feels like she's missing something in life.
It's a very sad card.
It is a very sad card. She completed 2 years at Twin Peaks High School and never graduated. This does kind of address one of the questions I'd been bringing up in the podcast, or had in the back of my mind, was trying to understand exactly how old Shelly was versus Bobby and Leo. So she was born in 1972, which is the same year as Bobby Briggs. Leo is 4 years older. So if we go by the card dates, she is the same age as Bobby. Leo is older. She was she was a high school dropout. So that would explain why she's not in school and why she's able to be, married with Leo. She's probably 18 then. It kind of does start to line up. She probably got emancipated at a young age, I'm guessing, and was able to marry young.
There is a lot that deals with both Shelly as well as Leo that I almost am curious on wanting to see something prequel-like, if you will, that deals with their relationship, because there had to be something in which, like, Shelly liked about Leo.
We need a board game. Like they have cards. We have an access guide.
What?
Well, actually, there is a Twin Peaks board game. I don't know if that has any lore in it. We need what else can we have? What other media a calendar. And the calendar provides all of the lore about Shelly and Leo. It's a Shelly and Leo Johnson calendar. It just has pictures from the show of those characters and then little text blurbs on every month. And we learn about their amazing backstory through the calendar pages.
Why a calendar?
I'm just thinking of more merch opportunities for them, okay? More merch things they could do.
The other ones are books. This is just a book in, like, small doses. That's what cards are. Books in small doses.
That's not how that works. Nope, that's not what this is. I refuse. I refuse. And I refuse to talk about Ben Horn. Because we've already said he has no weaknesses.
I refuse to refuse your refusing a Ben Horn. I think that one...
So you're going to accept my refusing?
I'm going to accept Benjamin Horn into my life.
Ooh, as your Lord and Savior?
Yes.
Okay.
The church begins.
He doesn't look a thing like Jesus. But he talks like a gentleman.
But yes, Ben Horn, like, this still, like, shows off a bit of his accolades and so on and shows no weakness. Like, it's a very standard card. What I think is very notable is that he was on the Special Advisory Board for Trade and Development for the state of Washington.
Yes.
Entirely. Mm-hmm. Like, Benjamin Horn, like, came from a point of, like, a large area of power
Yeah.
and influence, if you will. And now he's where he's at, maybe thanks to that overall end. Or say, for example, that's something that he might even flirt with it more in the future. It's, again, I just assumed Ben Horn just kind of sprouted it up inside Twin Peaks and just sort of like grew and branched from there.
Didn't he comment on wanting to go for a Senate run after all this stuff?
He did.
Twin Peaks? Yeah.
He did.
He might have his eyes set on like more of a big office.
Yes.
At the state level or national level.
Yeah. And he might be successful because there's more than just Twin Peaks that he's influenced, if the card is to be believed.
If the card is to be believed. We also have Jerry Horn, who finished college on a 5-year plan, law school in 3 years. He admits he overslept a lot. After 3 tries, he passed the Washington State Bar exam. He says his weakness is that he's always in the shadow of his brother Ben. Would you say that that is Jerry Horn's biggest weakness?
I mean, this seems like more of an emotional answer from Jerry Horn.
Yeah.
So
he's not right about himself?
I think that his biggest... I don't know. Like, this is an emotional take. I don't know if I can agree in someone's emotional state of self-deprecation.
Character.
Yes, they're a fictional character, but this is a very emotional answer. Yes. I don't weigh it in that same way. Okay. Mind you, like, what am I supposed to say? Is like, well, I could put it forward towards that, or I could put it inside of the notion in which maybe the cook that stabs him at the end of the series, maybe that is his true
my question
weakness.
For you is, Professor, if you hadn't read the card and I asked you, what is Jerry Horn's biggest weakness as a person? What would you say?
I'd say the cook answer, because I don't consider these. I hadn't considered, say, for example, him measuring up to Ben, because every scene that I see with him, he seems to be, like, very energetic, like, kind of like lean in towards his brother. They seem like 2 peas in a pod. It's just that Ben's a bigger pea.
I feel like the thing I would say without the card and a gut level is I don't know if he sees the big picture as well. I feel like he can navigate and maneuver socially and be intimidating in his own right.
Yeah.
And he can be smooth in his own right.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he has the ability like Ben does to view a long-term plan and stick with it. Mm-hmm. He's great in the moment, but I don't know if he has ambition. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he has drive to do something bigger long-term, whether for good or bad or personal gain or whatever.
Yeah.
I just don't know if he has that in him. He's more fly by the seat of his pants, go with the flow. He's a follower, not a leader, is what it feels like. And it's not inherently a bad thing, but if he's trying to get out of his brother's shadow, I feel like he would need to have ambition. That would be my answer. So, no, I don't think it's the cook. And yes, I think my question was good. And no, I am going to continue to yell.
And yet I would still say he's still confident and ambitious with himself enough to travel around, if you will, from place to place. And even say that he makes good company and he's overall great with how he does, despite the fact that he's set against a language barrier, it would seem from time to time, as the card implies. Maybe that's just his overall mind sort of like telling him how great he is,
right?
Or not. But at the same time, it's also come from someone who's putting himself down at the very next sentence. So, however you want to interpret that portion, I think it complicates Jerry enough that it's succulable. But
excuse me, what?
Succulable.
What does that mean?
Like you can suck on it.
I'm not sucking on Jerry Horn. I'm sorry.
But I don't know if there's enough to chew on for me.
I'm not chewing on Jerry Horn either. You weirdos. Man, I don't understand people these days. Sticking within the Horn family, we have Audrey Horn, voted best dressed in her senior class. Her weakness, I enjoyed her answer here. Some people say I am spoiled, moody, and naive. They are just jealous. It's like that stereotypical like mean girl, queen bee kind of like answer.
Yeah.
But she might be right at the same time. I think the pilot version of Audrey feels spoiled, moody, and naive. But she very quickly grows beyond that, I feel, within the show.
Yeah.
She still has bouts of moods. She's still limited, I think, in some ways by her background, not being as aware of what it's like for other people. But I think she does have positive traits that grow beyond those weaknesses. And I think that, yeah, people might just be jealous of Audrey. That's actually probably not fully wrong.
I don't have enough people to see like with jealousy yet.
Her
because
nickname,
again, lack of high schoolers in the show.
Her nickname is Princess. I'm curious, do you think anyone calls her Princess other than her father?
Me.
Oh.
Hi, Princess.
Ew, that's kind of weird.
How is it going? I am the Archduke.
I was just thinking it was interesting that the nickname she chose to share
to royalty.
I just thought it was interesting that the nickname she chose to share was her nickname her father gave her. Because I don't believe her mother calls her that. If she did, maybe when she was younger. But I don't get the sense that Sylvia would call Audrey Princess now.
Yeah.
So I feel like she's taking a nickname her father had given her, highlighting kind of how important that relationship has been in her life. I just thought that's interesting. Because I don't think her friends call her that. Could you imagine if she makes her friends call that?
are. We don't see her in high school.
She may not have friends, to be honest.
The school could have 5 actual students, and the rest of them are just people who are getting paid to be there.
Okay, let's count. We've got Audrey, we've got Bobby, we've got James, we've got Donna, we've got Laura.
All of those.
Those are 5.
That's 5, and 4 of those are in a relative friend group. Audrey's not in that friend group.
She's not. Are there any other high school kids? Is Joey Paulson in high school?
Maybe.
We're not even sure. Maybe he's homeschooled.
Is Cappy in high school?
Cappy's an adult.
Is Cappy in high school?
No, he's not in high school. Nadine's in high school. Nadine's the 6th one. There are 6 at least because Nadine's there. I'm going to say my headcanon is that I believe Joey Paulson is homeschooled. And if you have any evidence to fight me with, I challenge you to bring it to me. Bring me your evidence of Joey Paulson's high school record.
We've already shilled our contact twice in this podcast.
You can email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com or tweet at us at snakeeyedreams1 as in one piece of evidence, and I will rescind my claim.
This is too much power, Kalil. You can't keep...
And I will not accept if Mark Frost tells you in person, because I need canonical proof.
What do you mean?
I need something for sure.
Do you think that they're just going to make a special episode just for you to say that yes?
Yes, I want Twin Peaks to come back again, just for Joey Paulson's school record to be clarified. It's the mystery everyone wants to know the most out of Twin Peaks. Speaking of people who have mysteries, which is a lot of the cast, I know it's a terrible segue, Josie Packard, more mysterious than most.
Kinda, yeah. She's someone who keeps things close to the chest, but I wouldn't say that she's necessarily too secretive. She just doesn't speak or reveal any sort, and it's not like she just doesn't say it. I mean, that is a form of hiding, but at the same time, it's not as if she's manipulating the truth around.
I feel like she kind of
just doesn't speak about it, doesn't
I think she kind of manipulates the truth around her.
Do you have an example?
I don't know.
For the most part, it just seems that she's not telling people something.
I think her maneuverings with Hank and Ben show that she has that other side to her that is able to play people, to play Pete, to play Catherine, to play Harry especially. There's always a bit of genuineness, I think. I think she does care for Pete and Harry in a way, but she does use them as well for her schemes. Josie's a character I've gone to like a lot more over time. Josie's one of the characters I'd say that's grown on me the most, even though I haven't had much more material with her. It's just thinking about her character, the more I've come to kind of appreciate her.
Yeah.
And when I remember when I was hearing for one of the first times the Shoo Shoo, the band Shoo Shoo, when they did their cover album of Twin Peaks music, Shoo Shoo plays the music of Twin Peaks. The last song called Josie's Past, and it being excerpts from Laura's diary, starting to blur in my mind the idea of Laura and Josie's connection. Yeah. The amount we get of Josie in the diary. Just thinking about Josie's character overall, I think to bring in the Utsuna comparisons we always like to do, Josie's the Anthe in a lot of ways, or one of the Anthes. And I think that Josie is such an interesting case of both a victim and a perpetrator, and such an example of someone who, in order to survive, has resorted to becoming a kind of predatory animal herself. Because of the powerful men in her life that have used her, abused her, she has also become weaponized. Yeah. And in a way that is very dangerous to everyone, including herself. She's a very interesting case study that I think is never black nor white. It says on the card that her strengths, she says, through numerous male mentors, I have developed a survival mentality. That's the line from the card that stuck with me the most, is that she acknowledges, even for that little moment, that through the various male mentors in her life, she has developed a survival mentality. I think obviously of Eckert. I think of Mr. Packard, Andrew Packard. I even think of someone like Ben Horne as almost a male mentor in a way. Yeah. Not as clear cut, but another older businessman who wants to use her for his own devices. And I wouldn't be surprised, considering Ben's antics, and the way he responds to Catherine and other people, he no doubt made advances on Josie. I would find that hard to believe if he didn't.
Yeah.
Given Ben, and I think that Josie's over time had to use herself in so many different ways to survive, to get an edge over these powerful men, and to be able to play the game. And she plays the game as well as they do.
Yeah.
In her own ways. So I just thought this was really interesting as like just a little tiny moment where she acknowledges something that I think she's telling the truth. I'm like, yeah, I think that is true. And it says a lot about her.
It does. No, absolutely. I think that it very much sort of like fleshes out an aspect of a character that has very much been cornered to her whole entire life. And it has been very many times powerful men that have very much stood in her way.
Catherine Martell has other methods to dispose of those men in her life that are causing her problems. I don't know if they're better or worse. The Tojimura disguise leaves a lot to be desired. But apparently the Tojimura disguise is not the first time. She says, quote, "I used to love to go to Halloween parties because I always won the best costume prize. One year, my husband Pete and I went as a fisherman and his mermaid. We took first place, but had terrible allergic reaction to the rhinestones."
So
I like to believe that
there it is.
Catherine was the fisherman and Pete was the mermaid.
There we go.
You were hoping for it.
I was expecting this to happen right here.
I actually wasn't expecting it until you were waiting for me to do it. Then, like a trained seal, I reacted to the prompting because I was like, or, and I knew exactly what to do. I was not planning that one. I just thought it was interesting that there's a precedent, according to the cards, for her ability to disguise herself well.
Yes. Not to mention also reintroduces the fact that she speaks French as well as Japanese specifically fluently and so on.
She likes family traditions. Would you consider Catherine Martell to be a traditional person?
I consider her to have certain family values.
Like capitalism?
Like she has a family and she values that they're an asset.
That they're a resource to use.
Yep, there's family values.
I thought that was a kind of interesting comment. I'm not in love or against that. I just don't know if I fully gel with the Catherine Martell who likes family traditions. I'm not sure on that one. I don't know if family traditions is like her way of phrasing that she wants to keep her family business alive.
Like, the tradition of her family isn't a usual tradition for family.
Right.
It seems that there's a very specific traditional family value that...
And she doesn't really care about other people's families because she fires people so quickly from the lumber mill for, like, just being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Like traditional family values.
Like traditional family values, for sure. For sure. Pete very humbly says in his card that besides being able to bait a hook in the dark, he doesn't know what else to say as far as his strengths. Even though he does note in the likes category that he likes chess. He just doesn't brag about it.
Do you also want to know something from the Pete category, the Pete card, specifically what's going on with Pete?
Yes.
Hey, Pete, how you doing? Pete's big day, Pete's life. Pete is from, like, Pete, for his education, that is, he went to Missoula, Montana for that. He went to Missoula, Montana for his high school education. Now,
one of the 3 or 4 places outside of Washington we know exist canonically in Twin Peaks.
Which we do know that
show.
Characters such as the Palmer household, as well as apparently now a Martell at the very least, has been from. Which, mind you, 2 things. 1, where are the other Martells that live inside of Twin Peaks? Because we already know that there is a history with Martells.
Didn't the Access card kind of imply there's not many of them?
There's not many of them, but that's like not many and 0 are 2 separate numbers. They are very separate numbers.
Is he the only one left though? Like, does he have any parents?
That's
that are
what
still
I'm
alive?
curious on. Like, how did he come to like meet up with Catherine or like move back to Twin Peaks? Was it just more so like families separated? Was there some point in which like maybe they took up residence at like a home that once belonged to a Martell and so on?
I don't believe
but
we've been
that
given
was
an
a bad
answer.
fate happened to them.
It's
if
possible I'm forgetting something, but I don't think we have an answer.
We don't have an answer, but still, it's very interesting considering the life of the Packard
We'll
and
have to see in the secret
Martells.
history of Twin Peaks if they give us an answer on these questions.
We'll
We'll have to see. Or if they completely contradict all of this and leave us even more confused.
Yay.
Which I feel like is probably going to be what happens.
Yeah. But I'm excited for that too.
You know what I'm also excited for?
What?
Jean Renault. The
Why?
last character
Why?
that I wanted to talk about on
Why
this
are you
list.
excited for John Renault? That's the last sort of like like emotion one should have for a man like Jean Reno when he enters the room. Excitement is not the emotion that I would want to have, especially since Jean Reno is noted for being a man that doesn't really have friends because that's an easy thing for him to dispose of.
That is what he says his weakness is. So a very sensitive individual. Jean Reno does acknowledge it as a weakness. Yes, he's like, my weakness is I am not a particularly caring or sensitive guy. I tend to discard friends quickly. But at least he acknowledges it. Admitting it is the first step. Jean Reno, give him a bit of time. If you didn't shoot him, maybe you'd get better about that,
But that's what I'm about to say is like, even if you put up a first step, if no one's walking...
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's no other things to do there.
Yeah.
He's not taking any steps.
I think it's a little bit interesting as a note for a weakness because it's backed up in the show that this guy just murders Blackie right away. But this does offer a contrast between him and his brother Jacques. We don't know hardly anything about Bernard. We can't comment about Bernard.
Yeah.
But Jacques does seem to be caring and sensitive. Don't get me wrong. He still is bad. Like, the relationship he has with Laura and with Ronette, who are both underage, is incredibly immoral, inappropriate, and reprehensible. But among the adults that Leo is around, and Laura's around by proxy, of that group, it seems like Jacques has the reputation for being very caring and sensitive, and being kind of someone who's more gift-giving, more attuned to other people's needs and wants. So you get this portrayal then of Jean and Jacques, the difference between them. Yes, they're both involved in these illegal enterprises. They're both involved in the drug industry. But Jean is ruthless, whereas Jacques is a softie. It doesn't mean Jacques good.
Nope.
But it does mean that Jacques is more likely to be a lover rather than a fighter.
Which, mind you, I think that also is notable for like where they're going with business ventures. Jean Reno is noted for having like a lot of connections, if you will, that he's very proud of. Meanwhile, Jacques seems to be more so focused inside of his own little small town.
Keeping the business local.
Keeping it very local, keeping it very personal inside of the roadhouse and so on.
Right. Right, and unless there's like a whole bunch of Renaults spread around the entire state, we're assuming there's not a Renault in every city.
Potentially.
In every Washington town, there's a Renault running drugs. We're going to assume that,
Within
Jacques...
you, there are 2 Renaults.
Oh, no. I don't like either of them, really. Neither of them are good influences. You mentioned earlier that Harry Truman has been the sheriff for 6 years. This is also backed up in the sheriff station card. Now we're in the places section of the card
My favorite
pack.
characters, the places.
The places. So that means that, Harry Truman's only been sheriff for 6 years. It's not a super long amount of time. I think we learned other places his father had been sheriff before him. I can't remember where we heard that.
I think
but I remember hearing that.
I think that I recall it, or else you're putting a memory inside my head
well,
for me.
it's good. I'm implanting that. I've been working
Excellent.
on... In your sleep, I've kind of just been whispering things in your ear. Sheriff Truman's father was sheriff before him. And I just kind of been doing that for the past, 5 months, hoping it would eventually, when I say it out loud, Pavlovian would impact what happened.
It's as effective as the overall security within the overall facility itself. It's the point that the card does bring up that they have cells that are specialized for detainment. They've got everything in order for themselves, and there has not been an escape since Bob.
Bob.
There is not, Bob seems to be the singular
Only
aspect.
the outlier, yeah.
Up to and since
they
then,
can't prevent
Bob
against
is the big one.
supernatural scenarios.
Other than that, it's pretty tight-knit.
Pretty
but
good.
Still recognizing enough whoever is giving information of the overall sheriff station.
And also they use Bob by first name. They don't say Leland, so this implies that Bob is a household name in Twin Peaks.
Is it Truman that's giving this information?
I don't know.
Being
We're not allowed. You told me I'm not allowed to speculate anymore. I've lost my license to speculate. The station is also just 2 blocks away from the Wagon Wheel Bakery, where they get their coffee and donuts.
And
I think occasionally they go to Double R, but...
Which, by the way, there's tours on Tuesday, and those coffee and donuts are not just for the people there.
Nice.
It's for anyone coming by. You want coffee and donuts? Come to the sheriff station. Call 911 if you want coffee. Not in the context of this podcast in real life. Don't do that. Do not take that quote out of context.
Quoting the access guide.
Quoting the access guide. Thank you.
Yes. Speaking of the person who we should be most concerned about the access guide, the man who eats so many pancakes... Was it pancakes, right? Was it waffles? Was it waffles or pancakes that Big Ed ate?
It's a lot.
It was pancakes. I mean, at a certain point, you eaten 10 of them.
It's pancakes, I'm pretty sure.
They're just
in any case, it's
material
Big Ed.
in your
Big
mouth.
Ed.
Big Ed has owned and operated his gas farm for 15 years. So over twice as much as Truman's been a sheriff. His gas farm is closed during hunting season. Professor, we have been around, an area that has a large hunting demographic. I'm still ignorant because I do not hunt. How long is hunting season? Because there's multiple hunting seasons. It just says hunting season on the card.
I don't think it even matters at this point. Like, I could say it's a month, I could say it's 2 months, I could say it's 5 months. The big thing that is the issue at hand is that Big Ed's gas farm is right across the street from Big Ed's house. And it seems that he's having issues no matter what, in which people will just knock onto the door and then say, hey, can you open up for things for a little bit so I can? Even if, it's 9 months out of 12 of the year that's closed down because something always needs to be hunted inside the realm of Twin Peaks.
It's
never technically closed.
Okay, I get what you're saying now. I just think you wouldn't need people knocking on your door all the time if you had regular business hours. If you weren't closed for months on end.
I think that the big thing about it is that Big Ed's gas farm is probably just run by Big Ed. It's probably just Big Ed's place, and there's no other employee. There's no implication for any other employee. And it's right across the street. It's doing for overall hours that seem manageable for one guy, if you will, seeing as it's from 7 a.m. to about 3 or 5 p.m. or so and thing. So it seems like manageable for him. He can walk over to his house. He can go to bed. He can have his food. So yeah, I just don't think he has employees. I think it's just Big Ed's gas farm with Big Ed, featuring Big Ed, having Big Ed, starring Big Ed.
James might help now and then.
Maybe, but we don't ever see that. He's oftentimes riding away on his motorcycle and has $17 to his name inside of his account. So I don't know about that. All I know from Big Ed, though, is that from his card as well, is that he can't really make big decisions. So him being kind of stuck inside of this little meekish spot all on his own, just sort of dealing with his own stuff all the time.
It's just a funny word. You're not wrong. It's just a funny word.
It's just, unfortunately, his life.
Unfortunately, his life. He also likes to frequent the Roadhouse. We know that he does go there when he's not being knocked unconscious.
Yeah.
And the Roadhouse is described as Twin Peaks' favorite watering hole, known for its relaxed atmosphere and peanut shells on the floor. I just wanted to mention that the Roadhouse is known for its relaxed atmosphere, so I could put a pin in that. That's the only reason I'm bringing up this card. Just so I could put a pin in. Yes, I am keeping track of my pins at this point. Because
also,
I'm worried I will forget so many things when it comes to Secret History Twin Peaks and The Return.
I also like the fact that it's cash only, no cards, as if to be okay, as much as under the table as I can imply it, just because I imagine that there's no amount of radar Jock wants to be on.
It's a very good point. Very good point. One-Eyed Jacks, also very much under the radar. Ben has owned and operated for 11 years. Again, quite a bit longer, almost twice as long as Truman has been sheriff.
They have names for the people there, like the ladies that are present there to be ogled at.
Yes.
They are called the 52 Pickup Girls.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I'm not surprised.
Not surprised?
Nope.
Just more so staring at it
It explains it's thematic. Makes sense.
Mm.
It's the only establishment of its kind in the Twin Peaks area. Of its kind leaves some speculation of exactly which way they mean that. But I am assuming both it's the only casino as well as the only, brothel, would you say?
Yeah, brothels.
Gentleman's club, to use the euphemistic term?
It seems like it's more than a club. It seems like...
human trafficking ring?
There we go.
Again, it's questionable what type of business you would call this. It's weird, because One-Eyed Jacks is not really a secret. It is something that people know Ben Horn owns. It's not like a hidden piece of information that Ben Horn owns and operates this place. And ostensibly, it is legal within the paradigms of what they're doing, aside from the fact that they are bringing in underage girls through the perfume counter.
And the drugs.
But it's not quite a money laundering scheme because it is what it is. It's not lying about what it is. But underneath the table, there's a lot of illegal things going on under the veneer of just something normally a little gross and sordid, not normally illegal, but underneath there is a lot of illegal happening.
Mm-hmm.
So One-Eyed Jacks is kind of weird in that way. Then there's...
The other operated by the Horns.
I was going to mention that before we go on to that.
Oh, okay.
One-Eyed Jacks also is mentioned as a semi-private club with a semi-formal dress code, showing more that sort of weird in-between state it happens to offer. Somewhere between Twin Peaks and Canada. Accessible by boat. Or by land. Either way. Yeah, the other one is Horn's Department Store. I just thought it was funny that they offer half-price sales on August 4th in honor of Ben Horn's birthday.
Yep, it's basically a holiday.
Half off is pretty big.
Half off is pretty big.
That's no joke. It's not like 10% off. Because for how much Ben likes money, I'm surprised he's willing to go full half off.
I think that...
But it's basically cemented his birthday as an important holiday.
I think if there's one thing more valuable than $1 to Benjamin Horn, it's a stroked ego.
You can't buy a good reputation. Except when you can.
Except when you can, because he's doing that right there.
He is doing it fabulously.
Do you think that that's also Dick's favorite holiday? Benjamin Horn's birthday?
Yes, I think Benjamin Horn's
because that means like he's the biggest buyer.
Does his discount stack on top?
Ooh.
That's the real question.
That's the question.
Is it ever stated what percent his discount is?
I don't think his discount has been shown. I think he's been like offering. I was thinking it was like 20%. I want to believe it's 20%. Mm-hmm. I don't think it'd be super high. 20% is a decent discount. So my question is, does he get 70% off on Ben Horn's birthday? Or is it like 50% off and then that gets 20% off, so it's like in between there?
Makes you wonder. Almost as much as owls make you wonder. Now we're into the objects category. And like I was arguing with the professor off pod, animals are things. They are objects, so they are included in here.
Sure.
I say this as someone who, I like animals. I like animal rights. I'm vegetarian. Animals are things. Sorry.
Kalil proceeded to yell at the house cat, calling her an object.
She's a thing. Anyway.
You know who to send the hate mail to. You've already got all the things in order.
SnakeEyeDreams@gmail.com.
Damn it,
SnakeEyeDreams1, as in one thing to talk about being an owl. Owls, the card says, represent both wisdom and evil. I like how the card just straight up tells us, yeah, they represent this.
I think that's the thing that
These are the two things that owls represent. Here you go.
I think that also what I enjoy is just the blatant aspect of being like, yeah, you know what? Laura Palmer was almost killed by an owl in this specific date.
July 25th, 1986.
And also, an owl was last seen when Bob vacates Leland's body. Just being like, very
matter of fact.
Like everything else, like whenever it comes to the mysterious, like, oh yes, here's the tone we're going for. Before owls is like, yeah, no, it's...
Here's the basic information. Owls also appear whenever UFO sightings are made. Is that new information?
I think that's new information for Twin Peaks, but I don't think that's new information for, say, for example, just the general usage of owls. I've seen like the usage of the visuals of owls being connected to the mysterious happenings of UFOs.
But that definitely has tie-ins for Project Blue Book and Major Briggs.
Absolutely.
Because, again, aliens. There's a ceiling fan entry. Notice how there's no stairs entry. Remember in the pilot... We disagreed about the stairs versus the ceiling fan.
Notice the entry talking about the ceiling fan that whenever it comes to this card, that it represents whatever you want it to represent.
I love that. Located in the upstairs landing of
the
Palmer House.
It sounds like almost as if they could just put that as a stairs and say the exact same thing.
The ceiling fan represents whatever you want it to represent. As the Twin Peaks Gazette says, something is different. I love it. It's so irreverent. So useless and irreverent. But it does have its own card. The stairs do not. The log also has its own card, and that is a thing. Maybe a sentient thing, but a thing nonetheless. The log is 8 to 9 years old. So that log is older than Sheriff Truman has been sheriff. I don't know why I'm measuring everything time-wise by Sheriff Truman's sheriffhood, but it's the same way that we measure every height by Big Ed's, and every amount of food by what Big Ed can eat.
Like, you'd think that you try to measure things by the log, like the age of the log, but no, instead you're very much buckling down on this man's career.
Yes. The log's strengths are its special spirit and life force and great insight, but its weaknesses are fire and bark beetles. My weakness is probably also bark beetles, because bugs are scary.
They don't try to devour you, Kalil.
They could.
No.
I wouldn't be surprised.
No.
A bug's going to look at me and think I'm bark. And be barking up the wrong tree. I'm known for my pulpy texture. Coffee gets an entry, understandably.
And it's in all the episodes, apparently.
This one's kind of weird. I've not fact-checked that. I feel like that's not true.
It said it in the card,
I feel like that is not true.
It said episode all.
I'll try to find an episode where it's not in there.
But it's in there, but not on screen. Like, it's behind the scenes. The coffee is there.
Someone on the set had coffee that day. Some think, quote, this is from the coffee card, some think it was the coffee that made things different in Twin Peaks. If I read into that very seriously, does that mean is Dale Cooper coffee? Is Laura Palmer coffee? Does coffee have symbolic value? What about the coffee's different? What is Norma putting in that coffee? Why is there a fish in the percolator?
Refer to the Logcast episode where we talk about Fire Walk With Me, because the realization that coffee, too, has caffeine, and caffeine is a drug, and they do actually use things that could parallel potentially, because at the end of the day, even Sam Stanley had to say it freaking out loud for people like me to notice. Yes. 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 Yes.
This message has been brought to you by the Pine Cone, the official Twin Peaks flower. Received its own card. I like the Pine Cone card. Pine Cone gets a card, not Mike Nelson.
Yay! Pine cones are more important than Mike Nelson.
Singular Pine Cone.
The singular pine cone.
Corpse is a very funny card because it's located numerically right next to Laura Palmer's entry in the pack.
Actually, this is one of those fun little situations like where you like describe bird, right? Okay. On one hand, like it shows corpse, like it just says corpse and shows Laura Palmer's body, and then it says Laura Palmer and body bag on the other side.
Yes.
In which it does not say corpse on both ends. So
yes, that's true.
It's very nice.
I'm disappointed they didn't do wrapped in plastic. They did in a plastic bag. It's disappointing. The phrasing matters.
Nah, it gets the point across.
I got nothing to say about the
Like
corpse.
corpse.
I just thought the fact that the corpse had a card next to Laura is funny.
I think that's also notable that it's showing off, like it appeared in Life magazine's December 1990 issue as the top news stories of the year when it comes to that's featured in like magazines around the world. If you read this in context outside of the lore of Twin Peaks in the respects of
Right.
hey, in real life, everyone got to see Laura Palmer's corpse across the world because she's that influential.
Yeah, I mean, Twin Peaks is a huge show.
Twin Peaks is a huge show, but it's not a show inside of its universe.
Yeah, it's very confusing why it's a Time magazine event in universe.
I
Yeah,
love
the
it,
cards, you're just kind of expected to not take them too seriously.
I know, and I love it.
Because we're obviously taking them seriously
Yeah,
and
and
going
I
off
love
the
it.
deep end for it.
And I think that's
As long as we're
entertainment in that.
acknowledging that we're doing this.
We're doing this, and it's entertaining.
Laura's diary has a weird comment. It says, the real lesson of this diary is never put into writing what you do not want others to know.
Yep.
So I have two questions for you, Professor. One, is that the lesson of Laura Palmer's diary? They said the real lesson of the diary is
I think
never
it's
put
just-
into writing what you do not want others to know. Do you agree with that takeaway?
I think that's the takeaway from whoever is this writer, if it is potentially
Is that
us.
your takeaway from the diary?
No,
from
it's
what
not
you've
my
read of
takeaway from the diary. I think it's the most, biggest example that there is a person that exists within the realm of writing these cards, and it's not just specifically us trademark.
Second question, do you agree with that message in general? Not necessarily that the diary says it. Do you think that you should never put into writing what you do not want others to know?
I mean, there's like different like realities that can come up with it. Like a goal for it, if you will, to get it out of your system and so on, which is important, could be like a healthy exercise.
Yep.
It's just also in the horrible standard that we have Bob that exists in this world.
I'm
that
just
is
saying
going
in
to-
our world, do you
in
think...
our world, it's a case-by-case basis. Like, if you have a Bob in your life that's going to be doing this, if you will, there might be other outlets you might have to explore. If it's going to be something in which, like, you can just helpfully push that...
Would you write something that you do not want others to know?
Would I?
Yes.
Yeah, I have.
Okay. Good.
I'm pretty sure that
I will access those documents, and I will learn your secrets.
Okay.
You have failed to learn the lesson of Laura's diary.
It's not a lesson.
Your social security number will be mine.
At best, it's an idea.
Your ideological social security number will be my new idea to use. And then there's cherry pie. Cherry pie gets a card.
It's just a full recipe.
It is a full recipe.
It's like
Supposedly
ingredients.
it's good.
It is like instructions.
Supposedly it's a good recipe. From what
And
I've
it
been reading.
also brings up Dupars again.
Yay!
Like the overall restaurant, like, hey, you should try this out, but also here's how to make pie.
Were there any other cards that we did not talk about, or something you found in the cards that you wanted to express before we give our ending here?
I opened up to one of the cards and I can read it out loud. It's about the heart locket.
Okay.
This locket certainly had a great deal of mystery surrounded it. That's a correct statement from this card.
Wow. I won't even argue with that.
Given to Laura by James, they broke the locket in half while pledging their love to each other.
Wow.
That's true.
That's true.
Later, Laura's half of the locket was found where she was murdered. Also a true statement. James buried his half, only to have Dr. Jacoby find it and take it as a memento of his love for Laura, cementing that Laura Palmer was loved by Dr. Jacoby.
Wonderful and strange questions of the week. I got 2 of them. First up, what is your favorite card in this pack and why?
Bob.
Bob card?
Bob card.
Why is Bob card your
Actually,
favorite?
you know what? It's a tough choice between Bob and cherry pie.
Okay.
Cherry pie because it's a cherry pie recipe, and I think that that's an adorable sort of like thing to like feature on one of the cards, if you will. It's something like you can look at, it's like, I'll actually probably make this sometime in the future, but still, this is just like niece and it's nice.
Niece.
It's a niece, nice. Nice.
I feel like an
Niece,
uncle
nice,
when I
niece.
read this recipe. Okay, wasn't that funny? Anyway.
But,
Or Uncle Bob.
Bob. No. No.
Uncle Ikabe.
It's
Okay, I've been listening to our old podcast, like I said before, and I got to us talking about Uncle Ikabe. We've done it in 2 different episodes.
Hey, it's me, Uncle Ikabe.
What was that a reference to? What were we talking
It's
about?
Uncle Ikabe here.
By this point, it's been like 2 years since we recorded that. I don't remember what our inside joke was.
You don't want to forget about Uncle Ikabe. How could you forget about Uncle Ikabe?
It's not a Twin Peaks thing. I know it's an inside joke we put in our pod, but what are we talking about? Can't figure it
But
out.
Bob's card, not Uncle Ikabe's card. That's
Yeah.
in the expansion.
Expansion pack. Finally, we get the Joey Paulson card, the Mike Nelson card, Uncle Ikabe card. Finally.
But no, I think that it's just, there's no way of not looking at a card like Bob's card, not being A, intrigued by it, B, not being interested in what's being presented forward, and C, not kind of looking at the words and just having like a mixed bag of reactions, either positive, negative, or somewhere in between. Maybe all of them at once. It's a great card just because it fits so well with the tone of just, I would say, just Twin Peaks. I think it's like tonally the best card fitting for this.
Beautiful. It's my favorite card, too. So,
Yay!
yay.
For the same different reasons.
Pretty
adjacent
similar.
reasons.
It's just hilarious. It's just a funny card.
It's a good card.
It's the one that entertained me the most.
Mm-hmm.
And then, second question. If you could get any of the cards in this pack signed, which card would you want signed?
Fish.
I put the log.
You
So
want log?
we both kind of went for our dumb... I want the log to sign my card. I think mine would be more valuable
Just
than
like-
your random fish. Mine's the log, okay?
Would they just stamp the log all over it and it would just be like one giant like blob of like a Rorschach test on your
I
card?
don't know. What does the fish signature look like, Professor?
Just like dip like the fishtail in some ink and just like slap.
Slap. Listener, if you want to hear our signature responses on Inland Empire, that's what we're going to be checking out next. Inland Empire, as well as, probably in a separate episode, Inland Empire, More Things That Happened. Inland Empire is a long movie. We just talked for, probably about 2.5 hours, I'm going to guess, on a pack of cards.
70 plus cards.
Yeah. So, listener, thank you as always for joining us on our adventure. Thank you for indulging our antics and, occasionally contributing your own through emails and comments. We love to hear from you. I mean, we keep plugging our email, but generally, fan interaction is very much appreciated and part of what keeps us going and doing this. For those who have been asking or wondering, when is the return coming? Soon, with an asterisk. We're looking at Inland Empire, More Things That Happened. Then we're going to be jumping into the Secret History of Twin Peaks International pilot. Secret History of Twin Peaks, probably going to take a few episodes because it's a big old book. We got a lot to stew and chew on. And then we're going to get to the return before the end of this century. So coming up soon, asterisk.
Soon, asterisk.
Let's end this podcast, Professor. I see you've pulled out the deck of cards. Give us a final piece of wisdom to end this podcast.
Episode all cup of coffee. Some think it was the coffee that made things different in Twin Peaks. A damn good cup is available at the sheriff's station, Double R Diner, and of course, at the Great Northern Hotel. As Cooper said, the true test of any hotel is that morning cup of coffee.
And the gun that shoots you at the door. Hit me with your best shot.